Hey guys, please find your seats. We're going to get started. It's great to see you all. We have a very exciting topic today with some very exciting speakers. I'm so excited to be here with you to talk about AI, competition, and startups. Before I recognize our speakers and special guests from Washington, I want to tell you a little bit about why we're here and YC's public policy program. Last October, we hired Luther Lowe to be YC's first head of public policy. Where is he? All right. You'll hear more from him later. Why does YC have to have, why should YC have a DC presence? It's pretty simple. For the longest time, only the largest players in the tech ecosystem have had a seat at the table. But to paraphrase Pericles, you may not be paying attention to politics, but politics is paying attention to you. YC wants to fight for little tech in Washington and make sure all of you have a seat at the table. One of the most interesting spaces where we're seeing a lot of fierce competition is at the model layer of AI. Today, we're going to be speaking with the top antitrust enforcers whose job it is to keep the markets free and fair. Joining us from Washington are FTC Chair Lina and DOJ Antitrust Head Jonathan Kanter. These two are probably best known as Joe Biden's trust busters and lead antitrust enforcement for the FTC and DOJ. Combined, they oversee literally thousands of attorneys and nearly $1 billion per year of budget. And of course, we will end things with a fireside chat with our very own State Senator Scott Wiener. We also have some important partners I want to recognize for this event, including the Omidyar Network, Electronic Freedom Foundation, and Mozilla, who will be on a panel later. And finally, it wouldn't be a YC event if we weren't ultimately bringing it back to our founders. So in between these presentations, we'll actually have amazing demos exhibiting some of the incredible stuff that you all are building. As we stand at the forefront of the AI revolution, understanding the regulatory landscape is crucial for every founder in this room. And that's why I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Jonathan Kanter. And as Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, is at the center of shaping how AI will be regulated and how competition in this space will unfold. He's currently overseeing major antitrust cases that could significantly impact the AI ecosystem. His insights on antitrust concerns in AI, data monopolies, and fostering fair competition in this rapidly evolving field will be invaluable as you build and scale your AI startups. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Kanter to discuss the future of AI regulation and competition.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you to YC and Omidyar Mozilla for our hosts for today. I'm thrilled to be here. And so I have some prepared remarks and I'll deliver them, but I think it's important for me to kind of start really from the heart, which is I'm an antitrust enforcer. And so what does that mean? What does that mean about the work that you do? I want to be very clear about this. Our goal is to make sure that you can build businesses that succeed, that thrive, and that take on new ideas, new problems, and solve them, right? Antitrust enforcement is about making sure that there is opportunity for people to have great ideas, to build funding around those ideas, and to succeed. That's our goal. Our goal is to make sure that the markets and the marketplace has room for all the people who are building businesses, for all the people who are starting up companies, for all the people who are daring to take on incumbents and build new products and services that are disruptive. That's successful. And in a nutshell, that's what we're doing, and that's why we're here. It's no secret that AI is creating a transformative moment. It's wonderful. Technological revolutions are inflection points that lead to major change and major opportunity. It is an invitation for new technology and technological innovations and platforms, are an invitation for people to invest, to build, to create. That is wonderful. It is a exciting time, and AI is one of those really important transformations. But it's important to make sure we get it right, and it's important to make sure that these technologies are not only safe and sound, but that there is enough opportunity so that businesses of all sizes and in all places throughout the country have a fair opportunity to compete on the merits of their innovations and on their skill. And so it got me thinking about regulation versus enforcement. And I wanted to clarify that. So I'm a law enforcer. I'm not a regulator. My job isn't to regulate a market. It's to enforce the law only when companies violate it, to make sure that competition can thrive. I went back and was thinking about Justice Louis Brandeis, someone that is near and dear to my heart. There was something he said in 1912 that I think is very important for today. In an address, he asked a question, same question I think I want to present to you all to think about today. Shall we regulate competition or shall we regulate monopoly? It was an incisive and astute question then. At the time, there were a range of political leaders that believed that monopolies were inevitable. And so we should let them emerge, and then we should just regulate the heck out of them and have very strong oversight. But Justice Brandeis rejected that idea. He said, and these are quotes, "Private monopoly in industry is, as he said, never desirable, and it is not inevitable. Monopolies were not inevitable then, and monopolies are not inevitable now." The premise of the question presented by Justice Brandeis is that, is it more desirable to rely on competition and market forces than the inevitability of concentrated markets where the only remaining solution is to oversee them with invasive regulation? In all markets, but especially markets involving technology and key inflection points, the first line of defense is competition. As Justice Brandeis said, no system of regulation can safely be substituted for the operation of individual liberty as expressed in competition. To do so, he said, quote, attempting to substitute a regulated monarchy for a republic would be the result. And so today there's no substitute for the competitive process. Competition is what ensures continued innovation and that improvements are not hampered or impeded by monopoly choke points. Competition is what ensures that consumers, entrepreneurs, workers benefit in the long run. It ensures the freedom of opportunity that is available to all, including and especially companies that invest in new business and new business ideas. Strong competition and preservation of competition, especially early on, can go a very long way. Promoting competition early on enables many innovations as possible to survive and flourish. Promoting competition early on can ensure that it's not only the big companies that succeed, but also the small businesses and the startups that have the opportunity to grow. Promoting competition early on can avoid the more drastic regulatory measures down the line that would be necessary once monopolies emerge. And the importance of competition in AI at the early stages cannot be overemphasized. We must examine market realities and promote sound policies that promote and sustain opportunities for free and fair competition. For both AI infrastructure, AI applications, foundation models, promoting competition now will go a long way because it will shape how they develop and create oxygen for everybody to breathe. How companies develop AI applications and how those applications are ultimately brought to market will shape the field. The state of competition in AI hardware and chips, for example, will have enormous consequences for competition throughout the AI ecosystem. How we strike the balance between AI's use of creators' content and providing just compensation for those creators will shape the future of all industry. If we can protect competition, AI holds the promise of generating new businesses and new markets that can truly form the new Main Street, both figuratively and literally. Little tech companies, small, medium-sized businesses have the potential throughout the country to become the new version of the corner store being built on Main Street. And that Main Street doesn't have to just be here in San Francisco. It could be anywhere throughout the country. That is the world, that is the promise that we are trying to preserve. And startups that build on new and emerging AI can create small businesses and tools that support small businesses, ecosystems that don't just work for the biggest companies with massive global scale, but work for other corner stores. And because it supports business anywhere, has potential to just lead to the dispersion of opportunity so that we can see communities thrive, not just urban communities, but rural communities. And that will create new job opportunities and lead to a rising tide that lifts all boats. So we must do everything we can to promote competitive markets, especially as these technologies develop. We have to ensure that the markets are deconcentrated and that opportunities are dispersed. We should strive for an even playing field that allows for as many companies and as many ideas as possible to be tested, created, improved, and pave the way for new businesses and job opportunities. To achieve all of this, the first step is a deep understanding of market realities. How does the stuff actually work? In May, for example, we held a really exciting workshop at Stanford, along with Stanford University, promoting competition in AI, where we sought to hear from diverse perspectives, and we did, from scholars, but also content creators, VCs, startups, in all different areas of the economy, everything from tech for tech to tech for healthcare. Those conversations, at least for me, were invaluable because it's how we learn, it's how we grow, it's how we deepen our understanding of these issues so that we can have sound policy and make sound policy choices. We've also worked closely with other agencies to develop our thinking and understanding. Just this past Tuesday, we released a joint statement on competition in generative AI foundation models and AI products, along with our counterparts at the FTC, which you'll hear from later today, the EC, and the UK. Through this joint statement, we pledged our use of available powers to promote effective competition in AI so that all companies, from the little ones to the big ones, and everyone in between will have the opportunity to succeed. And we're going to continue to make every effort. And that means healthy markets. That means room for all business models, whether they are closed source, open source, making sure that business models, especially open source business models, have the opportunity to build platforms and stay open and stay extensible so that they can allow the rising tide to lift all boats. And we can see the promise of innovation be realized across the entire continuum and help form the new Main Street. So with that, I'm really excited to sit down and have a conversation about some of these issues with Gary, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Jonathan, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I think I just have only a few questions, and I think we're both hoping to open it up to you all. But just to kick it off, I mean, the FTC has received a lot of, really attention and praise for their statement on sort of importance of protecting competitiveness in open source, especially at the foundation level. You know, what does protecting competitiveness sometimes mean? Basically doing nothing, or just wait to see how the market plays out? How do you think about that?
So I think we have to think about, first of all, we need to follow the facts and the law wherever it takes us. And so if there's no problem to address, we don't need to step in and try to address it for its own sake, right? Our goal is simply to say, okay, what's happening in the marketplace, and does it necessitate action? In the vast majority of instances, we don't do anything. Whether it's mergers or conduct, there's a lot of business that happens without us having anything to do with it. We focus on the instances where there are bottlenecks to competition, where there are impediments to the kind of development and growth that we were talking about early, that I was just talking about a few moments ago.
In your opinion, is the AI market at the foundation layer competitive, concentrated, or something else?
So we're seeing it play out. And so from my perspective, we have the promise for competition And that's really exciting. And so, we've seen the development of proprietary foundation models. And then we've seen, as I alluded to in my remarks, the development of open source, which has which can be a force multiplier for competition. And that's really exciting. I think one of the things that we talked about in our AI statement, one of the things I've talked about is making sure that open source stays open, right? So that people continue to build on it, and people can continue to invest in the value, and the dependencies that are created, and that value can be created and realized by small and medium-sized tech companies who are innovating on that. To me, that is competition in all its forms, everything from proprietary to open. And so a little bit of work early on by us and our communities to make sure that those models can thrive, to make sure that they can succeed, can go a very long way to ensuring that there is not just competition at the model level, but competition for those who develop on top of models.
Can you comment on how AI connects to the two U.S. versus Google lawsuits and your U.S. v. Apple lawsuit that was filed in the spring?
So I can't talk about our active cases, but what I can say is that we want to make sure that the next technological inflection points, particularly surrounding AI, have the opportunity to usher in new generation of competitors. Our cases, and if you read them carefully, they're designed to protect the ability of others, especially new innovative startups, to compete and realize the fruits of their investments. Those are the underlying concepts that animate our cases. And so to the extent that many of the new technological inflection points that are emerging now are based on technologies that revolve around AI, to me, it's important that we make sure that not just we correct the ills of the past, but that we create opportunity for those new and emerging technologies, many of which are being created by people in this room, have the opportunity not just to see the light of day, but to realize their full competitive and economic potential.
With that, let's open it up for questions.
Thanks. My name is Eric. Really appreciate the work that you've been doing on the Apple front. I started two companies that are relevant in that space, a smartwatch company and a messaging company. I know that you can't comment directly on the case, but for people who have, let's just say, much less of a legal background, what can we expect? Like, what are the major milestones that you see over the coming, months, years in that type of a case, for example? And then the second question is, can you think of any examples of enforcement actions that you might ask the courts in this or similar cases?
Sure. So let me start kind of with an animating principle that cuts through a lot of our cases, and you can see it in some of the cases you mentioned. You can see some of our recent cases involving concert tickets and other. A lot of our cases focus on moats that entrench monopoly power. And so rather than just thinking about how does a monopoly in one market lead to another, a lot of the fact patterns that we're confronting involve how do some of these technologies that you're talking about, some that you have experience with, have the potential not to just create new markets of their own, but to relieve and reduce the dependence on the massive tech companies or monopolies in the middle. And so a lot of our cases are about those flywheels, those moats, those feedback effects that might insulate those core monopolies from competition and allow them to continue to extract and stifle innovation. So what you can expect throughout our enforcement of these current cases, but also in the future, are the antitrust division, the DOJ, my team fighting for competition to open up with respect to those practices that deepen the moat, to allow those technological disruptors to create new opportunities and reduce dependence. And I think the cases that you'll see in the future and the kinds of remedies that we're going to demand, if we're successful, will focus on that core vision.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, I'm Angela, and I'm working on Andy. It's an AI search engine. I especially loved the comments you said about regulating monopolies and promoting competition. And my question for you is, one thing we noticed with Google is we think that they have a browser monopoly, not a search monopoly anymore. And so for AI, I think there's this huge potential to unlock more opportunities and competition. And how do you think that we can prevent a monopoly from rising up again when it comes to AI specifically?
I think we have to study the past and learn from it, right? And so I think part of it goes to, okay, what are the core elements of a monopoly in the tech space? And again, this kind of goes to Eric's question and my answer, which is it's more often than not the feedback effect. Where is the inflection point coming from? And what are the assets that a company might own in order to protect those new competitors from emerging, right? And so you'll see, for example, in some of our cases involving things like search, that we talk about browsers, that we talk about the kinds of advertising technology that might create interoperability and mobility for folks who want to participate in multiple ecosystems. We talk about messaging and other kinds of technologies that, again, allow people to move cross platforms and create the kind of technological innovation that we believe is important. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. But our starting point in every case now is, what is the core monopoly, and does the conduct insulate that core monopoly from legitimate innovative competition?
Hi, my name is Jeremy Nixon. I'm the founder of AGI House, which is this very charismatic, community of hackers, and we all have some complex beliefs about monopolies. Specifically, Google Brain, where I worked for 3.5 years, is responsible for the creation of the transformer and of sequence to sequence and of BERT, and certainly was sort of paid for with monopoly money. I would say similar story for Bell Labs. It seems like a lot of these monopolies do sometimes use their resources for enabling basic research and technological progress. And so do you have a complex take on how to make sure that that kind of thing is possible? Similar story, I guess, if monopoly profits aren't available, or at least like competitive profits aren't available for a company like OpenAI to take billions of dollars to create large compute clusters just to have it be whittled away by Meta releasing 305B, how can we have VCs who will be interested in investing in the creation of the next supercluster, which creates the next great model? Very complex questions, but hopefully you have some sense of what I mean.
That's great. They're great questions. So first, let me be very clear. We are not against companies succeeding and growing. We just believe that competition drives them to do better. The largest companies can innovate and bring great things to market and succeed, and they do. And I don't see that stopping anytime in the near future. But what we do care about is making sure that those companies feel competitive pressure in order to keep delivering. And to keep delivering in ways that perhaps might stretch them even further than they think they can go. So that's part of what we're looking at. Second is return on investment, again, is also something that we think is totally achievable and desirable. And there are plenty of companies making a lot of money, but business model competition is important too, right? There are different ways to monetize. There are different ways to bring and take value. And I think we want to let those innovations compete with each other, but we also want to see those different business models compete with each other as well. These are great questions. A lot of fun. Thanks.
Ishai Lerner at JLL. I really appreciate the work you guys are doing, or you all are doing, around, kind of breaking down some of these moats, especially when they involve business practices. But the other side of it is we see a lot of, I'd say, certain firms using litigation as a way to stifle competition, and really in a way that they have capital that's a startup does not have, and can really stifle competition in that way, which isn't really a technological moat, but it is a scale moat in the other direction.
Yeah, listen, bigger companies get, the more aggressive they can get, the more they can try to intimidate, right? Like a lot of the conduct that we see throughout the economy relating to monopolies often resembles bullies, and bullies can often throw lawsuits and other things your way. I think it's important for us as enforcers. Obviously, there's a legal system. People have the right to use it. We focus on making sure that companies are investing to the greatest extent possible in delivering results for the public. And to us, the more competition they face and the more that competitors can thrive free from impediments, the more that value will be given back to the public.
Hey, my name is Joe Dubé. I'm a founder of a company called Eden. My question for you is around the potential conflict between competition and the consumer in terms of protecting them. I see a lot of instances where protecting competition is totally in the consumer's best interest. You want as many pizza places you can have in your neighborhood, stuff like that. But in the situation where, like, let's say a Craigslist or an Instagram or something where there's a benefit to having everyone in one place, how do you choose when you have to choose between protecting competition and maybe protecting consumer outcomes?
Sure. I don't think that we have to choose between the two. I think we care about, as an antitrust enforcer, the animating principle for me is that competition yields great outcomes. And I didn't come up with that concept on my own. That's what Congress said when it wrote the antitrust laws. It said, hey, we want competition. Why? Because we think that yields better outcomes. It promotes opportunity. It creates to a more free and open and democratic society. So that's the concept that we've been asked to protect. And I think when you think about antitrust, the work that we do, it's not saying you're too big or you're too small or you should win or you should lose. It's simply saying, hey, you shouldn't engage in anti-competitive conduct that makes it impossible for someone else to compete if they have a better idea or if they have a better business model. It says, hey, if the dominant firm is going to gobble up rivals in order to deepen its moat, rather than allowing some of those firms to continue in the market and succeed and potentially go public or create new opportunities, then those could be antitrust violations. We're focused not on engineering outcomes. We're simply focused on addressing conduct that might get in the way. And I think that's kind of how we think about it. But I do want to be very clear. I don't think there's that trade-off. I think good, healthy competition allows everybody to benefit.
Hi, my name's Hanson, and I'm the founder of Lightsky. And so you're talking to a group of founders who've come to the YC. And, obviously, we hope that we're the founder that gets to IPO. But a lot of our companies will end in acquisition. And so there's been a kind of chilling effect on acquisitions due to kind of the investigations that the DOJ and the FTC have kind of started recently. And so can you comment a little bit about kind of like whether or not, like, what your perspective is on the chilling effect of investigations on acquisitions and how that...
So I appreciate the question. It's an important one. I start with the data, right? We're all data driven. The fact of the matter is the overwhelmingly majority of mergers never get a look, single digits. And then even a small sliver of that actually get challenged. And so the deal economy is moving, deals are happening. We only focus on the deals that have problems. And the deals that have problems tend to be the deals in concentrated industries, markets, or deals where you have a disruptive rival who might be taking on an embedded, entrenched incumbent. And so those are the kinds of transactions that we tend to focus on. I think that doesn't impede exit, it doesn't impede the deal economy. In fact, we see, again, plenty of deals happening. It's a narrow set of deals that satisfy a narrow set of criteria that are the problem. The other thing, and I think this is important, is we want companies to have the opportunities to go public. We want companies to build not just, although exit is a perfectly normal way for companies to realize value. Great world is one where companies can build and they can find a path to becoming public and do so in a way that is cost effective and can manage their resources as a public company and then build to become thriving, durable businesses that can not only increase the number of firms who are out there building new products and services, but frankly, for startups, increases the number of viable acquirers who can bid for assets. And so what we want to do is we get out of this cycle where there are only 2 or 3 firms, sometimes one in each individual space that is a potential acquirer. Instead, we want to encourage companies to build, and to do that, there needs to be pathways. One, to sell to someone who's not an antitrust problem. And I think that happens all the time, but we wish it would happen more because there are more companies that wouldn't create antitrust problems. Second is we want a world where companies feel comfortable that they can pursue long-term investments, including going public, so that they can generate value and grow and thrive in a way that is durable.
Jonathan, it seems like the operating word that comes to mind in like sort of a lot of the things that you're talking about is like the word open. So, on the foundation side, it seems like open source in terms of models. It seems like in terms of public companies, it's like, a public company is like an open cap table. I know you probably can't comment on some of the active cases, but, openness in terms of platforms and being able to have competition at platforms is like one of the things from as an outsider. It seems like that's,
Yeah.
certainly a goal. It's like ultimately markets are about openness, whether it's a cap table, the source code, or literally the platform that allows other people to thrive.
Opportunity, openness and opportunity are the foundations for competition. And so we are really excited about making sure that we can help preserve that. And a lot of our cases, one of the other themes is, a phenomenon that it's like open, dominate, close, right? Start open, get dominant, and then you start closing aspects of your open ecosystem so that others can't compete effectively. And I think making sure that the availability of folks who are creating, who are dependent on platforms and services, who are induced to join and build on ecosystems, can realize the fruits of those investments. And I think that's what a healthy ecosystem look like, where we have that openness. But I think that you're exactly right, Gary. It's true in terms of having openness and diversity of models, business models, but also is openness and to be able to succeed without having to exit through acquisition, and openness of a public company that you said, like cap tables, and where the public can essentially participate and benefit in the building of these great U.S. businesses.
One more quick one.
Lauren Good from Wired. Thank you so much for doing this. I think what someone was alluding to earlier was basically the recent manifesto from Andreessen Horowitz about little tech versus big tech. And the idea that the regulatory agencies are using brute force to essentially squash little tech through M&A. I think you addressed that well, but one of the other things that was in the manifesto was this idea that the government is proposing a tax on unrealized gains. And I was wondering if you're able to comment on that, and generally what your response is to this idea, since there are a lot of little tech people in the room.
I'm just a small country antitrust enforcer. So I'll focus on my little area of the world, which is competition policy, and let tax experts focus on those other things. But when it comes to making sure that businesses, including startups, have the ability to thrive and compete and grow, and that's our focus when it comes to thinking about the tech ecosystem. And I'll kind of finish where I started, which is, I think, competition is healthy. Competition is a force multiplier, and strong competitive markets can often minimize, if not entirely eliminate, the need for invasive regulation. And so when we have an inflection point like we have now, it is the time to make sure that we're doing a little bit of work on the front end to keep our markets competitive, so that we can see as many of our great business ideas succeed and thrive and stay in the market, and even become big, open, public businesses.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Luther Lowe, Head of Public Policy for YC. So at YC, we're all about our founders. And so between each of these policy conversations, we're going to have demos from our community. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mike Noob from Zapier. We're going to sort of feature how some of our community is using AI.
All right. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Gary and Luther, for organizing this event and inviting me to give a demo. I'm Mike. I'm one of the co-founders and the head of AI at Zapier. And my personal mission is to pull forward the future so that more people can experience the extraordinary benefits of future technology today. Zapier is workflow automation software. We are used by millions of businesses across the United States. The vast majority of our customers are SMBs, so small, medium-sized businesses. Think like 1 to 5 people companies. And I find automation can often be a little abstract to explain. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you all a quick demo of how Zapier, automation, and AI are working together to serve many of the businesses across the US. Let's imagine you're an SMB. We're going to use, imagine you're a coffee shop, and you get hundreds of customer emails every week. And your team's responding to these emails, but you as the manager, the owner, you want to try and get a summary. What's a good summary of all the things that people are writing about so that you can orient your attention and spend time improving your business? I know we have a lot of policymakers and representatives in the room too. So maybe in your world, you can imagine you're getting hundreds of emails from constituents and you want to try and get that summary of what are the top things on everyone's mind so you can be better informed and make better decisions about where you spend your time. So that's the problem. And this is a solution. This is a Zap. It's what we call our automation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick this off by sending in an email to this fake email Dropbox that I set up for this fake coffee business. Hey, are you open during Memorial Day? And I'll hit send on this email. And let me talk through what Zapier does here. So this is a Zap that I set up ahead of time, and it's going to, Zapier is going to receive anybody who emails that email. It's going to add it to a spreadsheet. Once we collect 100 emails in that spreadsheet, Zapier is going to release those and ask ChatGPT to create a summary and extract out insights from that. And then it's going to email me back a good summary of all of the things that I've collected so far. This is the spreadsheet that I've got. I've got a bunch of emails already in here that are sort of fake and representative. And there we can see my email that I just sent got automatically added to the bottom. And if I flip back to my inbox, hopefully, there we go. Just got the summary back. And this is a live summary that was automatically generated using Zapier ChatGPT email back to be out. It looks like some order shipping issues, product quality concerns, refund requests. All right, I got a lot to work on for this business. So this is a good example. This is just one of the millions of things that folks use Zapier for. Zapier supports those 7,000 integrations on our platform, and our users plug and play those integrations to build things that they care about. One of the things that I've learned is that over the last couple of years is that AI and automation, I think, are synonymous in a lot of our users' minds. The promise of both is software that just does more work for you. And I think this insight was what led us to go all in very early in AI. In fact, Zapier went all in on AI. I personally did in the summer of 2022, almost 6 months before ChatGPT was released. And Zapier is running about 10 million fully automated AI tasks per month at this point. And I think that makes Zapier the largest fully automated AI platform in the world at this point. And that usage has given us a front row seat into what's the promise of the technology? What are people trying to do with this stuff? And also, what are the fundamental limitations that they're running into? And what I'm seeing is this. The number one problem right now is low user trust. And that's due to low accuracy and low reliability of language models. And it seems, because we've been tracking this for a few years now, it seems those problems are not going away with scale. And this was my first hint that the underlying language model technology seems like it might be inherently limited. Now, of course, AI is getting faster, cheaper, and we have more model choice than ever thanks to open source. But as I dug in, I found something really surprising. The AGI innovation environment in 2024 is incredibly weak. And I think very few people realize this. We're stalling out on our progress towards AGI. And I think this is highly surprising. It was to me because big tech, these AI labs, a lot of safety labs loudly promote this narrative that scale is all we need to reach AGI. Just plug in more training data, make the models bigger, and we're going to get there. But this isn't true. Now, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, famously the Show Me State. So let me show you what I found that led me to believe that. This is a chart we put together of a bunch of the most popular AI benchmarks out there, all the blue lines. And you can see that over time, over the last couple of years, progress towards human level performance has been accelerating on these to reach human performance. What I found is that there's one benchmark called ARC, and it's the world's only AGI eval that exists. In contrast to all of the other evals out there, it's the only one that actually measures AGI instead of the more narrow form of AI. This benchmark was introduced and created in 2019, I'll note before language models, before any of the advent of scale that we have today. It remains unbeaten today. Now you might be curious, okay, what's so special about this benchmark? So here's an example. This is one of the 100 tasks, or a representative example of one of the 100 tasks that are in the benchmark. And your goal is to try and, as a human, figure out what's the pattern between the task input and the output, and then map it to the test. So in this case, you might, see, okay, it looks like we're trying to do, maybe fill in these blocks with the square with the dark blue, and we can check our answer. And there we go, confetti, we got it right. So this is an example task. These tasks are designed to be incredibly straightforward and simple for humans. And yet, empirically, no AI system can solve these 100 tasks today. This is incredibly shocking to me. Now, ARC remains unbeaten, despite for the fact that 2 months ago, I launched ArcPrize, a $1 million competition to anybody who could get AI to beat this benchmark. And so far, no one has been able to. And that's on top of the last 5 years of evidence as well. In the past, AI innovation was driven through curiosity, through sharing, through exploring new ideas. And instead today, fueled in, I think, part by big tech and big AI labs' self-interest, we now have scaling dogma. We have closed frontier research. We have LLMs as the only paradigm. ARC shows we need new ideas to discover AGI. I think the industry's misrepresentation of reality is distorting decisions by not only policymakers, but venture capitalists, by founders, by even students. There was $20 billion invested in LLM startups in 2023. By my count, only $100 million into AGI startups working on new ideas. Half the students that I meet don't want to work on AGI because they think it's a solved problem. And policymakers are even now considering innovation rate limiters like SB 1047 because the scaling dogma is so loud. I want to repeat, I think the AGI innovation environment we find ourselves in 2024 is super weak. The world is basically betting that a single commercial lab in isolation is going to be the one to figure out and discover AGI. That is in direct contrast to how we got here and why I'm even standing in front of you. We got here through open progress, open science, and open sharing. And that's not just true of AI, that's true of all science ever. In fact, I think if I'd go as far as to say, if you're someone in the audience who maybe thinks that we should pause AGI development or stop AGI development entirely, you should be pretty happy with the world that you find ourselves in 2024. But if you care about reaping the benefits of AGI in our lifetime, like I do, we need to work to undistort this market. I think policy and incentives should push towards open AGI research and not rate limiting the crappy version of AI that we have today. Now, I'm putting my money and time, thank you. So I'm putting my time and personal money where my mouth is. I created ArcPrize with the express goal to provide a very public measure of progress, or in reality, lack thereof, towards AGI. And I hope ArcPrize can play a small role in motivating researchers to work once again on new ideas and openly share them, and help steer AI policy away from regulatory capture and rate limits and back towards open innovation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sean Modi, CEO of Capital AI, Summer Batch YC. It's an honor to be here amongst such esteemed guests. Capital is a product to create persuasive content from data. In fact, it's so powerful, some of Washington, D.C.'s best lobbyists are already using it to win multi-million-dollar appropriations and create some pretty important policies. We're refining our product here at Y Combinator, but we already have 231,000 users. And we are in the process of finalizing a pretty large engagement with Politico, which I'll give you a sneak peek of today. So this is the nerve center of Capital. Under the hood, we're automating research. So we're looking at the entire open web and pulling in the most trustworthy links for the query at hand. We're also bringing open source and frontier models and a native document editing experience. When you click into this prompt box, you'll see the different types of formats that you can select from. The article is our most used format set. You can describe what audience you're addressing. You can say how long you want it. We're optimizing right now for quality of content, not speed. So you'll notice a little bit of lag as we put in a prompt. You can say what sources you want to pull from. Here, Google search, peer reviewed, or have it fully hallucinate and say none. And then you can select what content blocks you want. Images, web charts, generated charts, metrics tables, and direct quotes. So we'll put one in here, and let's say, Gary asked me to do one actually, so nothing like putting myself on the spot. So SB 1047 pros and cons. Let's let it rip. So now we're gonna push this out. It's creating a headline for me, understanding SB 1047 pros and cons, and it's gonna pull this information in line. While that's doing its thing, I'll show you some ones that I teed up already. So these, you kind of get a cross section of my brain of what I'm curious about. So I learned about this company ASML, which is, they make these very powerful machines that play a critical role in the global supply chain of semiconductors. So my prompt here was the geopolitical risks of ASML controlling key infrastructure in the procurement of semiconductors. And you can see, well, let's just jump back to SB 10. Here we go. So it's loading. You can see the sources we're pulling from. This is from LinkedIn. This is from Gradient Flow, DLA Piper. it's dynamically generating a table. So let's just see SB 1047, also known as the California Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Models Act. It's a proposed state bill aimed at regulating development and deployment of advanced AI models in California. This bill specifically targets AI systems with significant computing power, particularly those capable of performing over 10 to the 26 power operations. Interesting. So if I click on this paragraph, I can go deeper. So unlike other chatbots, this is a document creation experience. So it's making suggestions for me, and it's understanding the context of this article, explain the potential impact on businesses and consumers. That sounds interesting. So I'll let that prompt rip, and it's going to go pull from the open web and reprompt that specific paragraph. And it's asking me for a clarification. I'll do that. Yeah. And the federal government. Cool. Scrolling down, we have dynamic tables generated here. Looks like these are the different provisions of the bill. It's pulling out key metrics. So 1026 operations threshold for AI models. We don't plagiarize. When there's a quote, we're going to give attribution to where it's from, and you'll be able to see precisely the source. In this case, this is from Elon. It looks like it's from Forbes. And arguments against, stifling innovation, exodus of talent, impact on open source, economic impact. It pulled in a chart. This isn't the sexiest chart, but we scan the entire page and we understand the context of the page, and it's like having an analyst tell you. The chart illustrates the increasing share of AI-related research and development expenditures at US colleges and universities, as well as the rise in proportion of newly founded AI startups among all tech startups, so on and so forth. And I can go deeper at the article level here too, convert this into a dialogue between a policymaker and an AI developer, discussing the pros and cons, long-term economic innovation impacts. I'll do that. So I'm quickly understanding this topic and creating a piece of content that could be useful for my job. And then let's jump over here. I'll show you a few other things I've been looking at. I was curious of the Republicans' approach to FTC antitrust. So I generated a pretty in-depth report here of how the Republicans and Democrats approach FTC antitrust enforcement. And if I want to go and take that, let's say I'm a journalist at Reuters and I want to, break some news or have an opinion piece, I can go take this and put it into a Google Doc and work with it. And here it is with all those tables embedded and citations at the end of where the data came from. A few other things before I show you the Politico preview. These are the economic pitfalls of taxing unrealized gains. My prompt was, write me a speech to an audience of reporters, startup technology founders, and US federal regulators on why taxes on unrealized gains is a bad idea for the United States economy, including lots of data. So here you can see, paragraph 1, there's 7 sources that went into this, which are all linkable. If I wanted to add a paragraph in between, it understands the context of the 2 paragraphs, and it'll make suggestions. Analyze the implications for economic growth and investment. Cool. So I'll add that in line. If I need an image for my article, I'll convert this paragraph into a synthetic image. So I pass this paragraph to a diffusion model, and what you're going to see is a synthetic image in line. Looks like this. How I feel. So if I don't like the styling of it, in this case, it's not my favorite look. I'm going to change it to something maybe more cyberpunk. Where's my cyberpunk aesthetic? Let's let that go. There's my new paragraph above with citations. As we go down, you can see more tables. So it's giving you the information you need in a fast form factor. From very complex data sources. We're looking at 12 different pages here that were fully scanned and synthesized into a cohesive narrative and fact-checked. Yeah, we'll keep going here. I'll show you, there's a big incident yesterday in Alaska of a joint Chinese and Russian military exercise. So I was curious about that. What are the national security implications of this issue? So I asked for an in-depth analysis of why the Chinese and Russian military flew a joint exercise near Alaska. And I got a pretty good assessment of the history of their joint exercises and what it means for the Arctic. I went deeper, natural resource context of China and Russia interests in the Arctic. So you get the sense. So now, zooming out, you can all use Capital today, CAPITOL.ai. For the affordable price of $8 a month. That's if you use the discount code Design Capital with an O. But now I'm going to show you something that's up and coming and pretty exciting. So we are friends of publishers. I live in Washington, D.C. Some of my closest friends are journalists. And I think right now AI has a kind of, keeping at hands distance relationship. We want journalists to thrive. We cannot live in a world without journalists. Journalists play a critical part of democracy. So that's why Politico reached out to us because they want to embed AI into their Politico Pro product. Pretty much every major lobbyist, every major government official, every congressional office, every Senate office uses Politico Pro to understand the inner workings of Washington, D.C. So this is their product. And what you'll notice is a little widget called AI Reports powered by Capital AI. So if you were curious how Congressman Ro Khanna versus Blake Moore voted on Ukraine aid or on Israel aid or on other types of key matters, you can put in that prompt and it would look at all the Politico Pro proprietary data and give you an interactive report. So I'll give you a preview of what that actually looks like. If you go to the open left nav, you'll see create an AI report. We're going to introduce this concept of projects. So you can add multiple URLs, articles, data sources to basically a bucket, a folder. In this case, this is 2024 funding bills. I'm going to add those sources to my prompt box, and then it's going to suggest different prompts of how I can interrogate that data and write a report. So I'm going to go with the suggested version, write an article explaining Bill S2605 and its impact on the Interior and EPA. And just like you saw in our open product, you're seeing an in-depth analysis of this bill. And this was created in Capital, obviously in this prototype but superposed for Politico Pro. This will be a full document editor experience where you can edit text, highlight text, and add specific data to sections. You can add YouTube videos, PDFs, Word docs, legislative data, regulatory data, and prompt it. So here you can ask Capital to provide examples of specific provisions of the bill, or you can take a testimony from court, add it, and say, highlight the key parts where, X happened, but it doesn't end just there. So X out. At the document level, this is where you'll manage all your sources. You can remove sources, add them, regenerate things. And if I want to turn this into a tweet storm or a piece of content to influence policy, not only understand policy, but to influence policy, I'm going to go turn this into a tweet storm. And then I'm going to prompt it saying, write a series of tweets in opposition to this bill, targeting spending. And what I have here is a tweet storm opposing this bill, citing articles from Politico Pro and other sources that are relevant. And if I click that, I can reprompt it using AI, so the cycle continues. So that's a little preview of shape-shifting, as we call it, with our product. You can see that original source here, how AI will be infused throughout the entire analysis process. This goes into the regulatory aspects as well. Your average citizen, it's hard to understand the legalese of many of these things, and we want to democratize that. So yeah, that's what we're building at Capital AI. Open to your questions afterwards, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. Up next, we have FTC Chair Lina Khan is going to make some remarks, and then she's going to participate in a fireside chat similar to how Gary did with Jonathan. We've flown out Timothy B. Lee. Does anybody read Understanding AI? Outstanding Substack. I highly recommend it. It's really helped a non-technical person like me kind of understand what's going on under the hood. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Timothy and Chair Khan. Chair Khan will come up and speak, and then Timothy will come up and interview her. And we'll have some time for Q&A for the audience. So Timothy is a technology journalist and analyst who writes the popular Substack Understanding AI. With over a decade of experience covering tech, economics, public policy, he brings deep expertise to his analysis of artificial intelligence and its impacts. He previously wrote for Ars Technica, Fox, Washington Post. He has a master's degree in computer science from Princeton. And through his writing, he really helps readers grasp how AI works and how it's reshaping our world. His newsletter is exploring topics like large language models, self-driving cars, AI's effects on labor markets, maybe a SB 1047. I don't know. Maybe we'll see an article about that soon. The philosophical questions raised by artificial intelligence. And then Lina M. Khan is the chair of the Federal Trade Commission appointed by President Biden in 2021 at the age of 32. This is Lina Khan's third YC event. We had I was like 2 weeks into the job, and we had her come out last November. And then she came out. We did a policy event in Washington called Remedy Fest, and not only was Shere Khan there, but we also had Elizabeth Warren and JD Vance. So it was like this interesting assembly. And then at the event, JD Vance said, "My favorite member of the Biden administration is Lina Khan." And so now that he's been named the vice presidential pick on the sort of Trump Vance ticket, everybody is like, scouring the transcripts of our first real policy event in Washington, Remedy Fest. So that was kind of a cool thing that happened last week. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. A legal scholar and antitrust expert, Khan rose to prominence when her 2017 Yale Law Journal Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, which challenged traditional antitrust thinking. Prior to her FTC role, she was an associate professor at Columbia Law School, served as counsel to U.S. House Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee on Antitrust. She's known for her innovative approach to competition policy, advocating for more aggressive enforcement against tech giants and other large corporations. Her works reshaped the conversation around monopoly power in the digital age, earning her recognition from publications like Time Magazine, Foreign Policy. She has a JD from Yale Law and a BA from Williams College. Please welcome to the stage, Shere Khan.
Hey, everybody. It's so great to be here. As Luther mentioned, this is my third YC event. And before each one, Luther really tries to convince me to ditch the blazer and just wear a t-shirt so I can fit in, but I haven't been able to get there. So I hope you'll forgive the blazer, though now I see Luther is also wearing a blazer. So I don't know what happened there. Well, it's so great to be here. And as you all know, there's been a lot of talk recently in Washington about how to address AI. And Gary has been just at the forefront of making sure that little tech has a seat at the table, and so that to make sure that we are hearing from market participants across the board. And so really appreciate that advocacy and championing the role of little tech. And so against this backdrop, it's really exciting to be here to get to talk about how we can make sure that America can harness the full opportunity, innovation, and growth that AI could present. And I believe that a vital ingredient to making sure that these markets stay open, honest, and competitive is going to be vigorous antitrust enforcement and competition policy. Fair competition is what ensures that the best ideas win, that markets are actually rewarding businesses with the best skill and talent rather than rewarding just the businesses that can exploit special privileges or advantages. And these are really the markets that allow tinkerers and dreamers to come up with a big idea, take a risk, and thrive. Historically, these open, fair, and competitive markets have been the engines of American growth and innovation, especially at moments of major technological disruption and transformation, like the one that we're seeing now with AI. And so these are the moments that we in particular see breakthrough ideas that can really shift the paradigm. But history shows that these are also the moments when incumbents can try to tighten their grasp, even if it means abusing their power because they have the most to lose. So these companies can potentially exploit bottlenecks and stop the flow of innovation. They can leverage their market power to pick winners and losers rather than allowing the best ideas to win. And so to make sure we fully harness the benefits and opportunities of AI, we have to make sure that we're staying vigilant and that we're making sure that upstarts can really compete on a level playing field here. And I believe that this is going to require, alongside other things, a real commitment to a philosophy of openness across the industry. Which means open markets, but also open architecture, open ecosystems, and open source software. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how we at the FTC have been thinking about that. For decades, open source software has driven competition, innovation, and opportunity in the tech space. Under certain conditions, it has allowed researchers and developers to build on each other's discoveries more easily and more efficiently. Take Linux, for example, which was developed more than 30 years ago. With the help of the community that sprouted up around it, it has allowed countless technologies to flourish, from cloud services to supercomputers. And now it powers some of the world's most important systems, from the New York Stock Exchange to the particle accelerators at CERN. It would not be an exaggeration to say that nearly all of Y Combinator's most successful companies would probably not even exist without open source software in its community. So many of the technologies that we use every day would still be just ideas because the barriers to entry posed by proprietary software can sometimes just be too high. Openness is more than just a feel-good philosophy. It's been a proven catalyst of innovation, which is why it has attracted hundreds of billions of dollars in venture capital funding to help startup founders bring their ideas to life. So it's worth thinking about what open source could mean in the context of AI, both for you all as innovators, but also for us as law enforcers. Of course, the definition of open source in the context of software does not neatly translate into the context of AI. And I know there's a lot of discussion still figuring this out, and I've been really grateful to get to chat with some of the leaders that are really thinking through what a shared understanding of openness could mean in the context of AI. As a starting point, instead of saying open source models, the FTC has been using the phrase open weights models, specifically referring to AI models for which the weights are publicly available. It's still early days, but we can already see that open weights models have the potential to drive innovation, promote competition and consumer choice, and lower costs and barriers to entry for startups like the ones that incubate here. The FTC is clear-eyed about the conditions that need to exist to make this vision come true. As you know better than anybody, it isn't easy to build an AI foundation model. It's resource and capital intensive, from retaining engineering talent to accessing expensive compute infrastructure to acquiring the necessary data. These conditions have allowed, in some instances, the biggest technology companies to get a leg up in the AI race. If you control the raw materials, you can control the market and shut out smaller companies who don't have the infrastructure to compete. This can lead to fewer exciting products made by even fewer companies and can come at the expense of both innovation and consumer choice. But with open weights models, more smaller players can bring their ideas to market. There is tremendous potential for open weights models to promote competition across the AI stack, and by extension, spur innovation across the stack too. Open weights models can reduce costs for developers so that they can focus their capital on products and services rather than expensive model training. And they can free up venture capitalists to pursue promising new applications of models rather than starting at square one with model development. So at a basic level, open weights models can liberate startups from the arbitrary whims of closed developers and cloud gatekeepers. Developers that use open models, we've heard, can feel like they're less likely to have the ground shift under them because one day a model owner decides to significantly increase the cost of API access. This is the type of free and fair competition that the FTC is committed to promoting. You all deserve the opportunity to build in that type of environment, free from the undue sway of monopoly power. Of course, open weights models can also come with some challenges and risks. First, it matters who develops and owns the open model. We've seen firms deploy opportunistic open first, close later strategies where they use openness to draw in developers, scale up quickly, and enjoy the network effects and data feedback loops that this scale provides. Then, once they've ridden openness to dominance and locked in a user base, they can flip the switch and become closed instead. Policymakers across government need to be vigilant of this playbook, and antitrust enforcers already are. For example, in one of the FTC's lawsuits against Meta, we alleged that Meta in Web 2.0 had initially allowed third-party developers to build apps that integrated with Facebook, only to reverse course later and restrict access to those that challenged them. The Justice Department's lawsuits against Google allege a version of this story as well. Second, the licensing terms attached to the model are crucial. A developer could make a model's weights available under licensing terms that ultimately restrict developers from using it to meaningfully compete in the marketplace. And third, there's a serious risk of bad actors using open models for deeply concerning activities. AI can be used to clone voices, to defraud consumers, and to create sexually explicit imagery of people without their consent, including children. And this isn't speculation, we are already seeing it. And so even as we embrace a commitment to openness, we need to be clear-eyed about these risks. Openness is just one way to promote a level playing field for startups, there are other ways that we can shape policy to structure markets so that they really promote free and fair competition that allows the best ideas to rise to the top. Founders have told us that they struggle to compete because dominant players may be monopolizing access to great talent, to critical inputs, and to valuable data. The FTC is doing our part to be vigilant and to open up the market and ensure that founders have what they need to start and scale their businesses. First, talent. Some of the best engineers in America have been bound by restrictive non-compete clauses. We've heard from startups that secured funding and entered the market only to find that they can't grow because the talent pool has been locked up by the dominant players. Earlier this year, the FTC banned non-compete clauses. This will allow 30 million Americans, including developers, designers, and researchers across the country, to move freely from company to company with their innovative ideas and unique expertise. Second, we're making sure that you all have access to the critical inputs to build AI tools and models. One of the first merger lawsuits that we filed after I joined the agency was to block NVIDIA's attempted acquisition of ARM, which would have given one of the largest chip companies control over the technology and designs that its competitors rely on to develop their own chips. Our team determined that the merger would undermine competition and hamstring innovation of next-generation technologies. We also launched an inquiry into the partnerships between dominant AI players and cloud service providers to better understand the impact of these relationships on competition, and to make sure that no company is exerting undue influence or gaining special access because of the other firms that they happen to work with. Third, we're making clear that major companies cannot collect data by surreptitiously changing their terms of service. This is not only an invasion of consumers' privacy, but it can also distort the playing field and give these firms a leg up over smaller competitors that have fewer avenues for data collection. At the helm of all of this work is the FTC's new Office of Technology, which we launched last year to deepen our in-house expertise. Our team includes folks who have built open source software and who have deployed this technology to millions of Americans. We have active members of the open source community and alumni of startups that incubated right here at YC. I want to close by addressing what I see as a common misconception about the tech sector in policy circles, which is that tech is a monolith, that the interests and incentives of all companies are the same, be it the scrappy startup or a giant firm. The many conversations that I've had with founders in Silicon Valley have really underscored just what a misconception this is. We've heard a lot of excitement from founders about the potential of this moment, but also some wariness of the existing control and influence that some of the incumbents have. And so it's really just underscored the importance of us in DC to be hearing from a broad swath of market participants, little tech as well as the big guys. And so I'm really grateful to you all for hosting me and really excited for the conversation. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Lee. I write a newsletter called Understanding AI, as Luther mentioned earlier. Thank you, Chair Khan, for coming. I feel like the classic antitrust case is like a company that's been around for decades and is behaving anti-competitively and is like clearly a monopoly. With large language models, we have kind of the opposite, where you have this market that basically didn't exist at all 2 years ago, and we went from kind of nothing to OpenAI has billions of dollars of revenue. Can you walk me through how the FTC thinks about a market like that? Because it seems like it's pretty dynamic right now, but you could certainly imagine a company, coming up in a monopolistic position. What do you kind of watch for to see like whether there's anything the FTC or antitrust regulators more generally should be doing, or whether it's just kind of stay back and see how the market develops?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that's really informed by the experience of the last few decades. And so in the early 2000s, we similarly had a moment where you saw a lot of, dynamism among a set of companies. And there was a sense in DC that the best thing for the government to do, including in the context of antitrust, was to just step back and entirely get out of the way. The thesis being that these markets are so fast moving that even if you have dominant players, even if you have monopoly power, that will just naturally be eroded in the marketplace. And so that was kind of the governing thesis. You saw a whole set of acquisitions be allowed to go through, hundreds of acquisitions by, the 4 or 5 big tech companies. And, fast forwarding today, I think we realized that aspects of that thesis were really misguided and really under-indexed the significant barriers to entry that you see in digital markets. I think there had been an assumption that, people don't have to build massive factories to enter these markets. And so we're just going to see a lot of entry that will discipline any monopoly power. Instead, what we saw was that, network externalities, the feedback loops of data really tended to lead some of these markets to tip, such as that, early players and players that were able to get a leg up and really deepen their moats, create entry barriers, raise those entry barriers, could end up actually solidifying dominance and monopoly power in a more long-term way, so that even once they started acting in ways that weren't in the best interests of their customers, be it on the business side or the user side, it became much more difficult for entrants to come in and discipline that. And so over the last, few years, including under the last administration, we've seen major lawsuits filed. A subset of those lawsuits are trying to correct for some of the inaction of the past, especially with regards to some of these acquisitions, but also with regards to some of what we now realize was anti-competitive conduct. And so that experience has been a cautionary tale in terms of the downsides of just assuming that these markets are so dynamic, they're so fast moving, so we don't have to worry about monopoly power at all. Of course, the specific ways and tactics that dominant firms might use today in the AI context and in the LLM context will look different, but I think we've learned that there can be real downsides to not addressing monopoly power if it's being created or used illegally early, and instead allowing it to deepen and become much more difficult to fix on the back end. The other thing that we really lose is a lot of innovation, right? I mean, when you have monopolists unlawfully be able to squash some of these innovators or create a chilling effect so that some of these ideas don't even come to market, a remedy that you might get 5 years down the line or 6 years down the line can really never fully make up for all of that innovation that was lost. And so that's why we think it's especially important to try to prevent this stuff on the front end rather than playing catch up and clean up on the back end when you've already lost so much innovation and opportunity.
So I know that in addition to regulating antitrust, you're also, the FTC is a major agency in terms of privacy regulation. And I know one of the concerns a lot of companies have and consumers about large language models is sending their data to a big company like Google or OpenAI. Are there privacy benefits to open weight models in terms of being able to run these models on device or on a company's own premises as opposed to sending them out to some third party?
It's possible. I mean, I know we've seen some of those claims be made, and I think we'd want to, take a closer look before clearly saying that, there are definitive privacy benefits here. But those are absolutely concerns we've heard from consumers, but also like enterprise customers who will say, sometimes we are using some of these models and we don't have entire confidence that our proprietary information is not being fed back in. And we think the terms of service are written in a way that would protect us from that, but I'm not sure. And those terms of service actually changed last week. So maybe it used to be safe, but now isn't. And just a general uncertainty about what could be a pretty core issue for a lot of firms is whether their competitively sensitive information and proprietary information is or is not being fed back in. So we've been putting out kind of notices and blog posts for the market to just put firms on notice about what types of practices could be illegal under our consumer protection authorities. And so the consumer protection laws prohibit conduct that is deceptive. And so if companies are representing one set of data practices, but actually engaging in a different set of data practices, that could be deceptive. You could also just deceive people by omitting certain key information. And so we think how this information that's being fed into these LLMs is being used is a material term. And so we've made clear that companies need to be upfront about that.
So we've had several people this morning mention SB 1047, the California legislation on AI safety. And one of the big criticisms of that is that it might discourage companies from releasing open weight models because it places a lot of requirements on companies that release those open weight models. Is that something that you're concerned about?
I mean, I'm not going to weigh in on this specific bill, but as a general matter, I think it can be tricky, right? Knowing how to strike the right balance. And I think candidly, policymakers do have a lot of legitimate concerns about how some of these tools could be misused, and they're already seeing some of that play out in real time. And so they feel an obligation to the public and the constituents to protect them from some of these risks. That said, I think it would be a real missed opportunity if we didn't position openness to really get a fair shot in this marketplace, especially from a competition perspective, where we've seen that in this type of market where, the entry costs can be quite prohibitive, openness can be especially important because it just lowers those entry costs. It kind of can focus people on, innovating in more efficient places. And so, I do think we need to craft policy in a way that preserves the opportunity for that openness.
Mm-hmm. In your remarks, you mentioned the risk of fraud from deepfakes and AI. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing. I mean, this is definitely something people always talk about, but you're probably in a unique position to actually see kind of the magnitude of this. And is this still like a mostly theoretical thing where it's happening a few places, or something that's really happening on a large scale?
So the FTC does police fraud, and we, for years now, one of the most common sources of fraud that we see in our complaint database is imposter fraud. So people pretending to be the government or pretending to be a legitimate business, calling up people, pretending to be the IRS, saying, hey, you owe thousands of dollars, and if you don't, wire over money in the next 24 hours, we're going to come and arrest you. Like, these types of scams are actually still quite prominent. What we've seen with fraud, with some of these AI tools, is that they risk turbocharging these existing types of fraud because it allows scammers to disseminate fraud much more quickly, much more cheaply, on a much wider scale. With voice cloning tools in particular, we're also seeing an uptake in complaints of, people pretending to be somebody's grandkid and, feigning their voice quite effectively. And so we've been thinking through, how can we be most effective? One thing we recently did was launched a voice cloning challenge where we actually invited the public to submit ideas to us about how either us as a law enforcer or people in the public could potentially detect voice cloning fraud in real time. And so are there technologies or ideas already out there that would allow you, when you're getting a call, to figure out in real time, is this a real voice or is this a fake voice? We got some really interesting ideas and just announced a couple of months ago the 3 winners. And so, we've spotlighted those. We hope that will help them, get more uptick in the market and really be able to scale. And so, we're using our law enforcement tools, but we're also thinking more creatively about how else can we encourage innovation, not just in fraud, but innovation in fighting and detecting fraud.
Questions?
Sure, in the back.
Thank you. Greg Miller, Building 80, an AI legislative affairs platform. Curious to know, we see a lot of arguments that some of these firms are so big that even the big firms need to engage in anti-competitive behavior or acquisitions to compete against the other big firms. We see this a lot in the flight industry, airline industry. We also saw, Google needs to pay Apple $20 billion, and then Apple can compete on other fronts, right? I'm wondering how you think about that, how you think about these companies being so large that they need to do certain things to compete against the other really large companies.
So as a general matter, we never think illegal practices are okay, even if other people are doing them. It raises an interesting point, and one we definitely hear in all sorts of contexts. Famously in healthcare, I think we've seen a lot of consolidation, and some of these markets can get into a mode where you start seeing an arms race of companies that are having to bulk up, and they say we're having to bulk up because the other side bulked up, and it's kind of ends up being this race to monopolization. And, we're a law enforcer, so we look at what do the laws say. And the laws say, actually, you need to be able to stop consolidation in its incipiency, right? Congress identified fair competition as the way that we need to structure our markets to make sure that the public can benefit, be it consumers, small businesses, workers. And so we have a mandate to actually crack down on some of that. I can certainly see that if you have, years of inaction on the law enforcement front, companies can feel, well, I'm not being protected from this monopoly abuse, and so my only way to survive is to become a monopoly myself. And, I think that really underscores the importance of enforcing the law so that firms are not put in that position. But I think the risks of consolidation and unlawful monopolization can be so high that it's really not a good idea to double down on that. In addition to the harms that we've been talking about, I think we're also seeing the resiliency costs that can come with centralization, right? If you're centralizing production, you can also be centralizing risk so that when you have a single disruption, be it a natural disaster or, a contamination in a factory, that can end up having cascading effects. And so the whole system breaks down. And so I think, the resiliency risks, the innovation risks of some of the centralization are so high that I don't think we want to go there.
Hi, I'm Emily, founder of Clearly AI. We're doing security and privacy from first principles. So I had a question around your role to protect against deceptive practices and consumer privacy, specifically around how you're thinking about the fact that today it is a default opt-in world for training on your data, and specifically thinking around Slack's announcement to default opt-in everyone to train on your Slack conversations, and you have to email an archaic email in order to opt out. How is the FTC thinking about that versus switching over to a default opt-out world?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question and one that we've been grappling with. A few months ago, we actually did a roundtable with a bunch of creators, people across the creative professions, from authors to graphic artists to fashion models, people who have seen that, they wake up one day and overnight their life's work has been by default fed into some of these models, and in some cases is now being used to compete with them without their permission. And so one of the big issues that they flagged is that all of this has been an opt-out model rather than an opt-in model, in addition to, the lack of compensation, and that they think fundamentally needs to change. We've put out some notice for firms about instances in which overnight changing your privacy policies so that by default firms are opted into that, or people are opted into that scraping, could potentially be illegal in some cases. You really can't mislead people. You shouldn't make it extraordinarily difficult to exercise the choice to actually opt out. And so that's something we're tracking closely.
Hi there, my name is Nikhil. I'm founder of a company called Rescript and the current batch. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the overturning of the Chevron case and what that means for companies who have to now, comply with a different sort of regulatory environment.
Good question. I wasn't expecting a Supreme Court jurisprudence question here, but I love it. This is definitely a moment where we are seeing courts revisit some key principles that had been in place for many decades. And so, it's been a moment of uncertainty and some destabilization, even for government agencies, as we wait to see how the court rules on some pretty foundational questions. In the Chevron context in particular, the court has basically said that even when a statute is ambiguous, the court should not necessarily defer to the agency's interpretation of that ambiguity. And the courts really are the ones that should be in the driver's seat and figuring out what the law says and means. So, generally there's much more skepticism of administrative agencies and kind of just deferring to that expertise. In practice, importantly, though, the court also said that although we are overturning Chevron, that doesn't mean it's open season to revisit all of these previous decisions that relied on Chevron. So they're kind of limiting the potential destabilization of that. But it's something, we're following closely. We think everything we're doing is already in compliance with these new rulings, but it's definitely a evolving landscape. There are going to be some, big decisions teed up for the court next term as well that we're going to be following closely. And so you have to kind of stay nimble and see where things land.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. We're not a founder. I'm representing the European Union here on the US West Coast. My name is Gerard de Graaf. So we're innovating a lot in regulation, but not unfortunately so much in AI and these other things. But I mean, my question, and thank you for your leadership and also for the very close cooperation between the FTC and particularly, I mean, DG Competition and increasingly also DG Connect. I mean, you mentioned the philosophy of openness. You also said it can take time, and then there's foregone like innovation. And I mean, we had the same analysis in the European Commission, European Union, and we came to the conclusion we needed an additional tool in our toolbox, an ex ante tool, and we couldn't just rely on ex post because it was taking sometimes too long, and it was case by case. And by the time that case was resolved, the challenges were dead. And so we have the Digital Markets Act. It's still relatively recent. It's a couple of months, 4 or 5 months. But my question to you is, do you think the US should kind of need a Digital Markets Act? Would you be in favor of a Digital Markets Act of ex ante to give yourself more margin of maneuver?
I mean, I defer to Congress on those issues. They're really the key players to figure out what additional laws are needed. We're really charged with using the existing laws and tools that exist. It is a very, interesting moment for ideas about what to do here, if anything. One concern and question that I've heard from some, including in the tech world, is when you have companies that are vertically integrated across the entire stack, including with layers that are essential inputs for downstream players, does that create a core conflict of interest? Like if you are dependent on a firm that is also now becoming your biggest competitor, like how does competition really work there? And I think that's an important question. Historically, there have been markets in the United States where lawmakers said there have to be some structural separations. And so if you own the railroads, you cannot also own the coal mines because there's going to be a risk that the railroad will only transport their own coal and not of the independents, and then the independents have nowhere to go, right? Similarly, in our banking laws, we traditionally had a system of separating banking from commerce because you didn't want the companies that control the credit supply to be competing with all the companies that depend on them for the credit supply. So historically, we have had markets where we recognize that certain layers played such a foundational role for downstream economic activity that we couldn't risk corrupting the incentives up top. We really needed to keep them neutral in a certain way. And so, that's an idea that I've heard in various discussions, and that would be clearly something that would need to be done through new laws. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm the founder of a company called K-Scale Labs, building open source humanoid robots. I was wondering about, basically, this is more like soft question, but there's this sense that I feel like a lot of government agencies are getting more politicized, and I was wondering, I kind of view FTC as a very important sort of pillar of tech innovation. I was wondering how you think about that. Like, what's it like in DC? Like, how do you make sure FTC doesn't get defanged?
It's a really interesting time in DC because we are seeing, as you're noting, a lot of kind of disagreement on really major economic and social issues. But on issues around antitrust and anti-monopoly, we are seeing enormous bipartisan agreement that we really need to double down on fair, open, and competitive markets. We can't just cede markets to monopolies that can pick and choose who's winning, who's losing. And we see some of these concerns in the tech context, but we also see them in the context of our agriculture markets, our healthcare markets. One of the biggest areas of bipartisan agreement with the FTC's work is concern about whether dominant players in the pharmaceutical supply chain could be using their power in ways that's inflating drug prices for Americans, but also squeezing independent pharmacies and hollowing out parts of rural America that depend on these pharmacies for essential healthcare. So there are a whole set of issues where, people that represent all these different parts of the country are seeing firsthand the costs and harms of allowing concentrated economic power to be unchecked, to really be exercised in anti-competitive ways. And so, that bipartisanship and agreement across the aisle of the importance of the work that agencies like the FTC do are really important. That said, the monopolies and dominant firms that the FTC is suing and bringing actions against, they have power and clout. And so, that type of pushback is something that we certainly see. And it's kind of embedded in the DNA of an anti-monopoly agency that when you are doing your job, you're going to see some of that pushback. But it's really important to kind of stay focused and remember that we serve the public. And so, that's where we need to keep our attention.
Last one.
Thank you for being here, and thank you, Gary and Luther and YC for organizing this. My name's Dave Yen. My question, it's great to hear the focus around open source as well as specifically open weights on the models. But one of the biggest limiting factors for the acceleration of AI is access to data and high volume, high quality data. And so what are the FTC's views on data sharing broadly as far as helping to advance AI with respect to consumer privacy as well?
Yeah, I don't think we have kind of a dogmatic view on that. I think from a data privacy perspective, we always want to make sure that people's expectations aren't being upset, that they're not being deceived or tricked about how their data is being used. I'd be really interested to hear, what are some of the ideas that you all have about if access to data is right now a major barrier to entry or to scaling, what are ways to address that? And what would it look like to make some of this more available, but in a way that's not, jeopardizing people's privacy? So, we haven't come out with a fixed view on that, with the exception of wanting to make sure that if data is being shared, it's not being done in a way that's deceptive or unfair. We've also been very clear that there's certain categories of data that are just especially sensitive, right? So people's health data, people's browsing history, people's precise geolocation data. And so for those categories of data, there is a heightened obligation that firms have to not, surreptitiously share it or sell this data without getting affirmative permission from consumers, just because that type of information is especially sensitive.
Give it up for Timothy and Lina. Thank you. We now have another Lina Colucci, who's one of the most impressive founders and impressive companies from our Winter 24 batch, is going to do a 5 to 7 minute demo of Infinity that you're going to love.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is also Lina, and I'm also wearing a blazer. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. We are Infinity AI. We are building a script to video foundation model. And basically the way it works is users type out a script. They write out what they want their characters to say, and then they get a video out. And we train all our own video models. And so I wanted to give you a demo of how that works today. All right, so we can either type out a script from scratch, or we can, similar to ChatGPT, use a prompt and kind of get this first draft of a script. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use an AI prompt, and let's do YC partners complain about founders forgetting their badge. If you're part of YC, that's probably a common occurrence these days. And so when we generate the script, we'll get basically a first draft here. We have Gary saying, how many times can we remind them? Bring your badge. So we'll be saying, seriously, it's a small thing. So if we want, we can edit the script. We can regenerate it until we like the way it looks. And then we can press generate. And you'll see there's kind of a new pop-up here, and this will take a few minutes to generate. And so in the interest of time, I already generated a video with this prompt right before this. And so let's watch this video.
Another day and another founder forgetting their badge.
It's unbelievable.
I feel bad for their employees. How are they supposed to run a company if they can't even remember their badge?
Do we think they're allergic to remembering?
Serby, are there allergy kits we can get for that?
So this is the editor page. And so here we can go in and change up the script, regenerate clips, change things around. And then once we're happy, restitch things together and then share out our video. And so you can kind of get the idea here of this like script to video experience. I think for us, the main thing that motivates us at Infinity is storytelling. And our core insight back in the day was people are at the center of stories. And so if you have expressive characters, if you have good characters, you can tell really good stories, even if you don't have anything else. And so that's kind of the focus on characters and the script and the dialogue-driven nature of the product and of the video models that we train. One of my favorite things to do with our tool is actually to imagine people from the past and characters from the past, from the era before there were video cameras. And so specifically for this event, I made a video yesterday, and it features people from, luminaries from arts history. And so I wanted to play that. I think it's very relevant to the types of conversations that we're having at the event today. And it's also a reminder that the history of art has always been very much linked to the history of technology.
Printed books will never be the equivalent of handwritten codices.
The camera will never compete with the brush.
The gramophone will lead to a deterioration of American music.
The cinema is little more than a fad. What audiences really want to see is flesh and blood on the stage.
People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night.
Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?
We are Infinity. Thank you so much.
In Washington, sort of an important part of the advocacy ecosystem are civil society or nonprofit organizations. And that's been especially important in the last decade or so when it comes to technology policy. And so I'm really excited not only to sort of have these folks on the stage, but really to partner with them on this event. So I'm just going to have you all introduce yourselves and tell us about where you're from, and just very quickly, because we're going to speed run this panel to get us back on schedule, what your organization is doing and how it's thinking about open source AI.
So hi, I'm Haley Tsukayama. I'm Associate Director of Legislative Activism at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're a nonprofit devoted to defending digital rights, member supported. I particularly manage all of our state policy at EFF, so very involved, especially in the California legislature, both because we're here and because California is often a first mover. So really just looking at AI issues from the lens that we always have, right? Defending users, making sure that that independent people can break into the market, and just really trying to make sure that legislation doesn't pick winners and losers.
I'm Joel. I'm with the Mozilla team, and so Mozilla is up here in part because we, as Luther alluded to, are not just a company that builds products like the, Firefox browser that you all might be familiar with, but we're also, owned by a foundation. And that's a really crucial part of our work is, kind of fighting for an open internet, and especially, things like open source. And as, AI has risen in prominence and Mozilla has increasingly, kind of entered that space, AI is taking up a much larger portion of, what we're thinking about. We had a Columbia convening recently where we brought together 40 folks from, kind of the open source AI community and discussed many of the topics that have kind of been highlighted here today. So, we really feel strongly about, supporting the open source ecosystem and the open AI ecosystem to make sure that, there is kind of fair competition for folks.
Hey, I'm Gus. I am with Omidyar Network, which is one of the many philanthropic vehicles of Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay. So long time ago, we come from Silicon Valley as well. And we just announced a new strategy. We're going to be focusing mainly on tech. And the reason why I'm really happy to be here, be working with Luther and with Fraser Mozilla and EFF, is that we think that what we want is so you can succeed, right? We believe in competitive markets. We believe in like open source and tools that allow creators and entrepreneurs to succeed, and we live in like fair rules of the game for everyone. And yeah, so that's what we stand for, and that's what we're happy to be here.
Amazing. Thank you. So, Joel, can we start with you? Tell us a little bit about Mozilla's new report on model eval testing and open source.
Yeah, so out of this Columbia convening that we did, basically, as I talked about, we brought together, kind of 40 top minds in, the open source and AI communities. And I think, if I can underline one thing that kind of came out of this convening into two reports, and I'm not going to do it justice, you should go to the Mozilla blog and check out the full report. But I think really it emphasized that when we're thinking about AI, and I think Chair Khan talked about this a little bit, is that we can't just be thinking about, the standard definition of open source doesn't, copy paste exactly when we're thinking from traditional software to AI. So we have to think about kind of the full stack of AI as we're engaging with it, everything from kind of the artifacts to even like documentation and how open or closed that sort of thing is for users. But also I'd say the big takeaway, and this probably won't be a surprise for many of you, is that open source is really, really impactful and really useful, not just for spurring innovation, but for doing things like making it more possible for researchers to find elements of bias when someone is producing something, making it easier for people to find if there might be a cybersecurity vulnerability, and eliminating some of the dependencies that you might get from one single closed source company. I mean, I think many of us are probably still thinking about the CrowdStrike thing that happened a couple of days ago. And I'm not saying, open source will necessarily solve, everything like that, but it definitely creates an environment where more people can have more eyes on something, and you can help eliminate some of those risks.
All of you sort of represent, and maybe this isn't fair, maybe some of you would sort of brand yourselves as, oh, we're not left or right, we're sort of in the middle, where we have issues where we agree with folks that are right of center and left of center. But I kind of think of this sort of civil society ecosystem as being a bit left of center. And I'm curious what your sort of personal view of like PDOOM is. Like, what's your probability that we are going to face like existential risk according to AI in the next handful of years, or maybe the next, maybe give your own timeline. But because one thing I've been learning as I sort of get neck deep in AI politics, it's very strange to predict which organization or individual, based on where they sit on the political spectrum, is going to fall here. So I'd love for you all to kind of tell us what's your personal PDOOM. How do you think about this tension between safety and openness?
First, so humans are really bad at predicting the future, and right. So I think that we need to be careful and mindful. Like, we should not learn the wrong lessons from the past, right? Like, when we think of public policy, yes, some things went wrong in the last 20 years. Many things went wrong. We need to address them. But I think something that Lina said very clearly, Lina Kanter very clearly said, for a long period of time, it's not that we didn't have the rules to make sure that abuses were not correct. So we were not enforcing existing rules that have been in the books for ages. So I think that we should not repeat that mistake, and we should have guardrails that allow creators and innovators to create without constant fear of liability. I believe that 99% of people here are going to be trying to do the right thing, complying with all the rules the best that you can. So if we're going to have systems that create obligations, we should also treat good citizens trying to do the right thing well, giving them the right to cure when they discover that, well, it was a best effort, it didn't work out, and before getting a sanction, let's try to correct it and keep moving forward. I think that's the kind of like system that we need to have in place. And I think that in many of the pieces of legislation that we see around the world, that's very improvable. So hopefully we're gonna get there.
The TLDR of Gus refuses to answer the question. Next.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're going to let me obfuscate my way out of this one, but I think it probably depends on how I slept last night. Is how I'm going to rate my PDOOM today. So I think I would say it's definitely relatively low, and I think when we part of the thing that is hard with this is when you're thinking about a single metric for something, it's easy to look at all the negatives. So when we talk about PDOOM, it's of course we're thinking like doom is a big word, existential risk is a big word, but I also I was one of those people who kind of came up reading Ray Kurzweil and, the singularity is near. And, I'm definitely would describe myself as a techno optimist. And I think that.
You on that Brian Johnson shit?
Well, no, does it look like it? I got a little pun.
Don't die, baby. Don't die. I think Brian Johnson's coming to YC in a month or two. I might fly out for that.
No, so I would say like, look, there's P Doom out there, but like we also got to factor in P Hope or P, the world is going to be really fantastic soon. I mean, this is my first time back in SF in a long time, and this was my first day I got to ride in a self-driving car. And how cool is that? Like, I felt like I was in the future this morning. And so like, I have a lot of hope for technology and what it's going to bring. So I think we can't just focus on the P Doom.
Yeah, I'll echo what they both said. I mean, and you said personal, so that's how I'm going to get out of this, right? This is Haley and not EFF necessarily speaking. But I mean, I think, for me, in terms of priorities for legislation, like there are definitely things that we could be addressing right now with tools that are happening right now. And that's sort of where I want to focus the priority. And I think if we set good principles for how to address the problems that we're seeing right now, then you can kind of do both at the same time, right? You can think about the short term, the medium term, and the long term. So, and I like the idea of also articulating a more hopeful future at the same time.
I'm going to stay with you, Haley. We were chatting a couple weeks ago, and I believe Senator Wiener has arrived, or he's about to arrive. We're excited to have him here. Where's Scott Wiener? Everybody give it up for Scott Wiener. We'll see him we'll see him in a second. But we were chit-chatting about, SB 1047, which has come up a couple times today. Is the EFF has sort of a position of supporting with caveats. I think the community letter that sort of bubbled up from YC was sort of like oppose. The form is kind of annoying because it's like they sort of hold a gun to your head and they're like, you either have to you have to be for it or against it. And I didn't know how to. I'm sure that there's sort of a version that sort of the communities could be happy with, but I would wonder if you could kind of unpack the sort of if you had a magic wand, what that would look like, the things that did look good, because I think you and I had some agreement on some of that.
Yeah. So, well, this is fun. Hello, Senator. So, yeah, EFF is in what we call a supportive amended position. As you say, the California legislature makes you pick from like 6 very particular positions. I think SB 1047 is a really interesting bill. It's a very broad and complex bill. And so the position that we've asked for is that it creates this public cloud computing cluster. We really, really like that idea. And I think we just think that it deserves to be the focus of the bill, like that it's worth getting that right. And then it's also worth having the other conversations that are in the bill about how do we address safety? And those we would like to see those conversations sort of continue with more stakeholder input. We'd love to have folks from this community engage in that. There were a lot of AI bills in the legislature this year, and I think just more conversations needed. Right? If you even think about the number of definitions of AI that we saw come through in the different bills this year, I think that entire regulatory conversation is very important. We want to get it right. We want to be sure that we're thinking about how to address it now and how to address it in the future. So we would like to see the bill focus on the public cloud computing cluster.
Okay, I said we're going to speed run this panel to get us back on track. Any super quick questions from the audience? Got to be quick.
Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm one of the co-founders of Squire.ai. In specific regards to SB 1047, I'm interested in all of your takes, or one, depending on speed, on the reach of the bill and its ability to impact and end engineer based on things in the bill, and essentially, and I believe, as we all discussed, openness and how much open markets competition are important. When there is that type of, I'll say, liability to the end user, often people will never even enter the market. So they're like, we're not able to observe the void that exists if something like that came in.
Yeah, I just mentioned, trying to understand the counterfactual, like who doesn't go into, developing something is super hard to calculate. So, I mean, it's certainly possible. I think that's, I'll let the senator talk about, the potential impact and kind of pawn this off on him. So like, look, I think what I would emphasize is that, like, we're here in Silicon Valley, a lot of amazing things get invented here. So of course, California legislation is going to matter a lot.
I don't think that's the intention of the legislation, but if we're in a context where we're debating on what can be the effects, And we've seen that the judiciary is making interpretations of legislation that are often contrary to what's clearly the intention of the legislator. We need to be very careful in how we draft rules to make sure that that doesn't happen, both that the intention is clear and that there's no possible argument of like what is intended. And if like the fact that that's a question and that's the case, that to me it invites a reflection on how can we improve things so we know that that's not what's intended.
And that is our panel. Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating. And if I can welcome to the stage Jake Heller from CaseText, please.
While Jake is getting set up, I wanted to say Jake has one of the coolest stories that we went into detail over on my YouTube channel. And Jake is also one of the people who got the earliest access to GPT-4. And one of the things that was most remarkable about that was, I think you said, once you got it, you realized, oh, hallucinations came down to a level where it almost never happened, and we could actually use it. And he pivoted the company into a tremendous, more than $600 million exit. So this is one of the first and most powerful examples of practical AI being used day to day in one of the biggest fields out there. So Jake, take it away.
So hey everybody, I'm Jake. I was a founder in the Summer 13 batch, which is forever ago. And I was a lawyer before I started this company. And what we decided to build, especially with this new technology, is a legal AI assistant. The idea, and this is not that different from probably a lot of the applications you're building for your various fields, is for there to be almost like a new employee at every law firm, government agency, nonprofit, and corporate legal office that is a new like legal employee that you can assign tasks to. And like a fellow employee, it'll be able to do that task, I'd say right now, like a junior associate. But unlike your human colleagues, it is able to do it at a speed that is superhuman. So we're gonna go through a few examples that I've kind of teed up. It's kind of for fun. And we're gonna imagine that we are representing Elon Musk as part of his litigation against Twitter. And you're trying to pull out of the merger agreement. So the first thing I'm gonna do is ask, can you pull out of a merger agreement when the seller made material misrepresentations under Delaware law? That was his argument. And we'll get our AI kind of researching that. What will happen behind the scenes is that it is conducting dozens of search questions. It's taking that question, doing dozens of searches against a legal database, pulling back hundreds of answers, reading each of them in full, all the cases, rules, regulations, and statutes, combining all the information gained from that activity and turning that into a memorandum. And while it's doing that, maybe we'll ask some other questions. For example, during legal proceedings, you may at times gather evidence, what's called discovery. And so here we have Elon's texts regarding the acquisition. And we might ask, for example, what are all the features Elon wants to add to X/Twitter? And just for fun, I actually picked this off of a New Yorker article. These are not as real texts as you'll see soon. So they're funny and they're not real, but they're still, still really great. And at the same time as I'm doing that, I can upload, say, the complaint from the case and ask it to make a timeline of all of the events described in the complaint related to crypto spam. And so you're able to do here, and I only have like 5 minutes, is it's now completed the kind of legal research task that would have taken me a good part of a day. And here it's kind of written out its answer, citing to the relevant case authorities, to which I can, from the relevant jurisdiction, I can open up and research and read myself. It has gone through the text messages and is able to not just answer the question, but also, what are the kind of funnier ones? Delivery tracking, e.g. pizza. It's able to pull out the exact part of it and highlight that for me to confirm, not that just kind of making stuff up, but that it's also kind of finding the right answers. It's pulling together this timeline for me. Each of these tasks take lawyers typically the better part of a day. And to move off the Elon example, you can also do some things that are a little more powerful with it. For example, I've uploaded here my Series A document that I got from USV back in 2014. And I've asked it to compare the Series A term sheet against all of the different actual documents that we ended up getting to the degree in which they differed. Because sometimes there is drift between what was agreed to in the term sheet and what actually happened in the actual final documents. And sometimes it's actually kind of hard to get. But so a lawyer may sit down, and you can see here it's kind of listed out everything: the price per share, the closing date, the dividends, the liquidation preferences. You can kind of analyze through this table which are the different things that it ended up catching are potential differences between the uploaded term sheet. Again, with the ability to say, go into the right of first refusal and caught here that the closing date was intended to be January 16th, 2015, but actually it ended up being January 20th. And that was the difference between the term sheet and you're able to do these kinds of things that aren't just difficult for lawyers to do, but in some ways impossible. It's hard for a lawyer to keep everything in their head about the term sheet while also reading through every one of the many, many pages of documents. But for an AI, say an AI with an incredibly long context window of millions of tokens, you're capable of loading up all of the documents, having them compare against each other, and make those kinds of comparisons. We, as Gary said, we exited to a company called Thomson Reuters, which is why it doesn't say CaseText up here, but has this kind of funky orange logo. We now have over 30,000 lawyers use us daily. This is one of the early examples, I'd say, of what I expect to see across the industry and a lot of things that you guys are building of this assistant infrastructure, assistant kind of agentic approach taking place within a profession and within professional workspaces to get real work done. So thank you.
Last but certainly not least, it's sort of the one we've all been waiting for, I think, is Senator Scott Wiener. And we have interviewing him on stage is Shireen Ghaffari from Bloomberg. I'm going to read their bios and invite them up to the stage. So Senator Scott Wiener is the California State Senator representing District 11, that's San Francisco. It also includes parts of San Mateo County. He was elected in 2016, quickly established himself as a prominent voice on issues critical to California's future, particularly those relevant to the tech and startup community. As chair of the Senate Housing Committee, Wiener has been at the forefront of addressing California's housing crisis. He authored landmark legislation to streamline housing approvals, including SB 35 and SB 423, which have resulted in thousands of new homes across the state. Yay! Prior to his Senate tenure, Weiner served as the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and worked as deputy city attorney. His background also includes experience as a litigation attorney in the private sector, bringing a unique blend of private and public sector perspective to his role. He's known for innovative approach to policymaking, tackling issues from transportation, climate change, mental health, addiction treatment. Recently, he turned his attention to emerging technologies, demonstrating his commitment to addressing the challenges and opportunities facing California's tech industry. With his Harvard Law degree and focus on forward-thinking policies, Senator Wiener brings a perspective that should resonate with our community. And Shireen Ghaffari is a reporter at Bloomberg News, specializing in artificial intelligence, ethics, and policies. She joined Bloomberg in September 2023 after 6 years at Fox, where she was a senior correspondent covering social media industry and major tech companies. We will have some time. It's going to be a little bit like the Lina and Jonathan panels. Shireen will interview Senator Wiener, and then we'll have hopefully plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll probably move to end about 1:55 and a special surprise guest speaker at 1:55.
All right. So thank you for doing this talk with me today, Senator Wiener. Your bill is just a little bit controversial in Silicon Valley. For those who don't know, but I imagine many of you do, it's a bill that would require any AI company deploying a certain threshold of compute power to test whether its models would lead to catastrophic risks, among many other provisions, but that's sort of the main gist of it. I want to start off just by asking you, why now? So AI, especially generative AI, it's still very nascent, right? Why did you feel a sense of urgency to do this?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I also just want to say thank you for all of the engagement by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways on this bill. It's been interesting, and it's a little different. I'm used to like housing policy where you have a lot of just a different kind of engagement at times, sometimes a little less constructive. And so I really, and I appreciate also to the folks who are critics of the bill. We've really gotten a lot of constructive feedback from folks who are not fans of the bill, and we really appreciate that as well. In terms of why now, as human beings, we have a tendency to not deal with potential issues or problems or challenges until something bad happens. It's just, I think, sometimes how we're wired as human beings. And we've seen this in the technology space around data privacy, around social media, about any number of issues where we really did essentially nothing and then had to play catch up afterwards. And by the way, Congress still has not passed a federal data privacy law in 2024. We did that in California in 2018, and it was controversial. And a lot of folks in the tech world were opposed to that bill and told us that everyone was going to leave California if we passed it. We passed it. That did not happen. And we set a standard that I think was a really powerful one. I also, I think it's about trying to understand and get ahead of safety risks, and doing so in the context of the reality that AI is, to me, incredibly exciting. What's happening now is incredibly exciting. The prospect of being able to solve problems that we have been unable to solve as a society, that of AI contributing to those solutions, is incredibly exciting. I fundamentally believe that AI can and will make the world a better place. But with any incredibly powerful transformative technology, there are always going to be risks. It's not unique to AI. There are always going to be risks. And so we should try to understand those risks. People who are building incredibly powerful models should try to understand those risks, as they have already committed to do. All the big labs have committed to do this testing, and to mitigate if it's possible, not to eliminate risk. We can't eliminate risk. That's not like the world, the reality, but trying to see if there are ways that we can reduce risk. So really accentuate the good while understanding the potential harms. And why now in California? Because I don't have any confidence that the federal government is going to do this. Like I said, Congress has not passed a data privacy law yet. President Biden issued this executive order, which the other person running, he who shall remain unnamed, has already said, or the Republican platform has already said that they're going to get rid of that executive order. The Republicans have been trying to get rid of NIST. And so we have a responsibility in California to lead.
So I know you've done some polling, or there's been some polling, and there was, there is some support. People say, in the general kind of public for this bill. I know it's passed California House by wide margins, but there has been a lot of pushback in the tech community, a lot of concern that this could stifle the startup ecosystem, particularly open source AI. So I just want to ask, did you expect and anticipate this level of pushback on the bill from the tech community? And what do you think are the most fair criticisms of the bill? And what do you think is maybe, the biggest misperception of it?
Yeah, so the polling has been off the charts, including among tech workers. But ultimately, as I've said many times, this isn't about. To me, it's not about polling. It's not about just winning the fight. I want to get this right. That is my goal, to get this right, and that's why from the very beginning, I've tried to send very, very powerful signals that we have an open door and that we want constructive feedback about the bill, because we want to get it right. And I am so deeply grateful to the folks who have really worked hard to provide that feedback, including folks in the open source community. And we've made a series of amendments in direct response to some of that critical constructive feedback. I knew that people were going to have opinions about this bill. The bill arose despite some of the conspiracy theories online, and there have been a lot of conspiracy theories about this bill. This bill arose organically, just from conversations I was having with folks in the AI space, frontline technologists, startup founders, academics.
You say which ones?
There was I attended a series of salons, dinners. There were actually a large number of people, and that's not to say they all had the same opinions, but that's sort of how this came up. And we then started haranguing a lot of the labs and VCs and others and academics to say, hey, can you tell us what you think? Tell us what you think. So it was not the other way around. No one came to us and said, here's a bill with a ribbon wrapped around it. Please introduce it. We came up with it, and then we started soliciting feedback on it. And I actually took the pretty extraordinary, very rare step. I've actually never seen it done before, where in last year's legislative session, 2023, on the last day of session, I introduced what's called an intent bill, basically an outline of the bill. We blasted that out to the world and actually put it into an official bill. Not because an outline, you can't pass an outline, but we wanted to literally just be super transparent about what we were thinking about to try to generate that feedback and critiques of the bill. So we've tried to do that from the very beginning. So no, I'm not surprised that there's pushback. I don't want to say surprised, because I've been around politics long enough to never really be surprised by any kind of politicking. There's been a lot of great analysis, critique, feedback about the bill. There's also been a lot of inaccurate information, just to be blunt, especially on Twitter, shockingly, but elsewhere as well. And
what specifically do you think is the inaccurate information that has been spread about this?
There have been, I was very intentional when we crafted this bill. I rejected the idea that you would have to get a license from the government in order to train or release a large model. There are people who think that you should have to get actual permission from the government. I rejected that out of hand. And yet there are still people who are either stating or implying or suggesting that you're going to have to get permission from the government in order to train or release a large model. There have been statements that model developers are going to go to prison if their model causes some sort of harm, which is false. It is absolutely false. The only way that this bill interacts with the criminal law is if you commit perjury, meaning that you intentionally lie to the government, just like if you lie on a driver's license application or a public benefits application or on your taxes. That's a crime. You're not allowed to, with knowledge, intentionally lie to the government. And yet, so, there were statements about developers going to prison because their model somehow contributed some sort of harm. That's not true. I think that there have been significant exaggerations about the scale of the potential liability in this law for model developers. And first of all, it only applies to, you have to spend at least $100 million, which is tied to inflation, on the training. We're talking about large labs. But in terms of liability, there are two ways where I think it's been inaccurate, the narrative about liability. First of all, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face, even if some people are not always hearing me, model developers can be sued today. If you release a model, whether it's Llama or whether it is a much smaller model that wouldn't be covered by SB 1047, if you release a model, someone uses that model in a way that, burns down someone's house or shuts down the grid or does something that causes harm, you as a developer can be sued today, not just in California, but probably in all 50 states under just general tort law. Now, with AI models, that'll get litigated in the courts, and it's a new developing area of the law, and the courts will set parameters in terms of under what circumstances an AI developer can be, a model developer can be held liable. But in terms of the risk of litigation that exists today, and it is dramatically broader risk than what's in our bill, because what's in our bill, only one human being no AIs, and only one human being can file a lawsuit, and that's the Attorney General of California. There's no private right of action for a lawyer to run into court to file a lawsuit. Only the Attorney General, and only in extremely limited circumstances. And so that's been another area where I think that the risk of litigation has been significantly exaggerated under this bill, while ignoring the current tort law liability that is a litigation risk for all AI model developers today.
I think the most common, and we're going to leave some time for questions shortly, the most common concern I hear from startup founders and developers is that this could have a chilling effect on open source, that that requirement that you mentioned, that's not far away from something like a Llama 4 might be, right, Meta's open source model, and that many developers rely on these bigger, more well-funded companies to release open source models. So if they're discouraged to release those models in the future, that would affect startups. What do you say to that criticism?
Yeah, I'm very sensitive to that. I want to be I've said it before, I'll say it again. I support open source. I think open source brings so many benefits to the innovation ecosystem. And our goal here is not to shut down open source. We have some provisions in the bill, and we've made amendments based on open source community feedback. For example, we clarified very explicitly that if the model is no longer in your possession, you are not responsible for ensuring that it can be shut down. That was a really significant concern that a lot of open source folks were expressing to us, that once I open source the model, how am I responsible to be able to shut it down? That was never our intention, but we realized that we could say that more clearly in the bill, and so we did that. We also were much clearer about what counts as a derivative model. And so if a model is changed beyond a certain point, it's no longer the responsibility of the original developer. And so, we've tried, I think in good faith, to try to address the concerns of folks in the open source space. And I don't think that this is going to shut down open source innovation and also for some of the reasons that I said, before. And also, to be really clear, all of the large labs, including Meta, have committed to doing safety testing. You can read out, it's all in writing, what they said what they committed to in Seoul, South Korea 2 months ago, where, in addition to the White House, where they committed to doing the safety testing. They committed that they would not release models if there was going to be some huge harm that they, that was not able to be mitigated. It's all in writing. They've committed to do this, including Meta. And so that's why, to me, if they're already, our goal is to require them to do what they have said they're going to do. I've also said that if what we're requiring is a mismatch, doesn't exactly pair up with the public commitments made, just tell us how you think it's different. We're happy to listen to that.
So the bill is still open to amendments, is my understanding. And actually, just today, the first kind of major AI lab that I've seen came out to support the bill with the caveat that they want some changes, right? And that's Anthropic. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And are you open to making the changes that Anthropic has asked for?
Yeah, so Anthropic last night sent in a letter saying, it was talking as EFF told us before, they checked the box of support if amended, meaning we will support it if you make the following amendments. And there were about 3 pages of detailed amendments. And I want to say I'm very appreciative that Anthropic, and they're not the only one, but then Anthropic took seriously when we said, give us feedback. Tell us what you want to see change in the bill. And Anthropic came with some very detailed amendments. And this is, Anthropic also, a lab that prioritizes safety and has, I think, the largest, the highest, the most capable model around today. Maybe I'm wrong about
for
that.
now, but that changes every.
Yeah, I'm sure it changes every week. And so, and we are, I'm very open to their amendments. It was some very, very thoughtful and interesting amendments, and I'm generally positive about their amendments. And one of them is eliminating the Frontier Model Division, the FMD, which has caused some consternation, and I'm open to doing that. We have to, because of the late stage of the bill, it's gone through a bunch of committees with amendments from committees, and so we have to, for some kinds of amendments, get sign off from the committee that passed the bill. So it's not exclusively. I'm not the reigning monarch of the bill exclusively. It's like a group effort at this point. But we are. I'm very open to the amendments that Anthropic has proposed, and there's still time. If people have, and there are some people who I won't name names, but some people who have made some very concrete suggestions, and we really appreciate that. And there's still time, but time is running out, so time is of the essence.
So find him after this talk.
Let's
Just
do
kidding.
Q&A. Thank you. Sure, we're
We're
low on time, so I want to move to Q&A. How many founders are here? Raise your hand if you're a founder. Raise your hand if put your hand down if you're not using AI in your company. Put your hand down if you don't live in San Francisco. Okay, so a lot of constituent AI founders in this audience. So I'm eager to hear your questions. Let's see some hands.
Thank you so much for being here, and I think your openness to feedback is commendable, and I think we all appreciate it. I don't think a lot of us here are going to train models from scratch to hit that threshold. So let's talk about startup founders. There's a higher probability we're going to fine tune, right? So from what I understand, and I read all of the text this morning, summarized it, did a bunch of little analysis. Even if you're fine tuning, you're considered a model developer. And if you're fine tuning, you're still subject to a lot of compliance. Now, we did some rough math on the compliance. That's like $500,000 a year, roughly, in all of the compliance work necessary in order to fine tune and release a model that is derived from a much bigger model that's actually.
So it's, I don't want, if I could just, or I can wait till you're done.
Go ahead.
No, in terms of fine tuning, it is those responsibilities would kick in only with a quite significant amount of fine tuning. So there's a threshold in the bill, and that doesn't have to stay that way in the bill, right? That was that's the kind of feedback we won't. I think it's very unlikely that it would be dropped like that, but that's certainly a appropriate topic of conversation, but it is a significant amount of fine tuning you'd have to do for it to become effectively a new model. It's not about modest amounts of fine tuning.
Got it. Yeah, that would be helpful to clarify very clearly.
I think it's very clear, that threshold in the bill. I think, as was just pointed out, that there was some concern that the Frontier Model Division could make an adjustment to that over time. It could also raise it over time. And this is always, by the way, with any kind of regulation, the push and pull is always that if you make everything set in stone, then people will, I think, legitimately say, wait, you're setting it in stone. What if the world looks different in 3 years? And then if you say, okay, we're going to give some flexibility so that you can look at changes in the world, then people say, but now we don't know with certainty what it's going to be in a few years. So that's always a balance that you try to strike, to have not too much flexibility, but at least some flexibility.
We got a question back here.
Hi, I'm Evan, CEO of Edge. First of all, I do want to say thank you so much for engaging. I'm okay naming names. I actually have been engaging with your office and sending over specific suggestions. I also put together a letter that hundreds of YC founders signed. So I can vouch for you really are engaging, and thank you for that. So my main fear with this bill is that it will become CEQA for software. You're one of the leading proponents of CEQA reform, and so you know that CEQA was not originally supposed to be CEQA. The Friends of Mammoth court case turned it into CEQA. And now, even when you're not violating CEQA, the cost of producing thousands of pages and the risk of being violating it is a huge impediment to a lot of things like housing, high-speed rail. And again, this came from court-made law, not from legislative-made law. And so there are two main areas where I'm curious if you're open to some changes here. The first one is the definition of AI. The definition of a model in the bill is a piece of software that can implicitly, based on inputs and outputs, define goals. That can plausibly define almost any software. And so I'm wondering if you're open to changes to the definition to narrow it very tightly to apply to a much narrower range of technologies. The second one is that right now it's really focused on liability. Your team has said that they're really focused on connecting this to negligence law. I think that's great. I'm wondering if you're open to, instead of substantial, reasonable likelihoods of harm or something, connecting it to proximate cause, which is the negligence term, and connecting it to a liability shield, where when you release testing, you're sort of making this trade where you're deciding how much testing you want to do. You're deciding how much cost you want to put in to testing. And in exchange, as long as you comply with the testing of your standard, you get a liability shield that protects you within that scope. And I think those three changes would actually turn this from the potential sequel of software to actually a positive for the industry that provides a lot of clarification and makes it easier to do business as an AI company in California.
Okay, so a few things. Hopefully I'll remember everything. Yes, you can remind me if I forget. In terms of the definition of AI, we actually, we had a definition when we first introduced the bill, and then through the legislative process, because there are, as was noted, a number of AI bills, large and small, there was the legislature, the two houses working together came up with a uniform definition of AI, because what would be bad is if we had like 10 different definitions of AI in different bills. And so it was made uniform, and I think that it was looking to other sources of law. So we're always willing to look at specific ideas. One thing I will note on that is because this only applies to models where at least $100 million tied to inflation was spent on training. That excludes an awful lot of potentially included models. So we are open to looking at making sure that it conform, or that it is close or more conformed with negligence law, because that's always been, and so that's like an ongoing topic of conversation. In terms of a liability shield, it does shield you from liability under this law. In terms of, if you're talking about a broader liability shield to like eliminate like existing liability, the bill does not do that. We're not changing other potential liability that someone might already face. And then in terms of CEQA, yes. First, I don't want to assume that everyone knows what CEQA is. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. It was a law that was passed and signed by Ronald Reagan, a Republican, in the early 1970s, which basically says if you're going to do something like, for example, if you're going to build a dam or a new freeway, you have to evaluate the environmental impacts to inform your decision about whether to do that. Over the years, I've described CEQA as the law that swallowed California, because now if you are trying to change if you want to rebuild the rotted out front porch in your home, that can be potentially subject to CEQA, and it has undermined climate action, building new housing, public transportation, et cetera. I would actually disagree that this will be, I don't think this is going to be in any way the CEQA of AI. This is so well defined. In addition, this bill does what many CEQA reform advocates have been advocating. The biggest problem with CEQA is that anyone can file a lawsuit. Even if you don't even have to disclose who you are. You can have like a fake email account and file a CEQA appeal and a CEQA lawsuit. It's absolutely absurd. And a lot of there are proponents of CEQA reform who have said, because CEQA does some important things, let's just say that only the Attorney General can file a CEQA lawsuit. That is a pretty significant, that would be a huge piece of CEQA reform if you couldn't have private lawsuits under CEQA, that only the Attorney General could enforce it. And that's what we do in this bill. So I dispute that this would be the equivalent of CEQA for AI. I think this is profoundly more narrow than what CEQA
Let's go to another
does.
question. Yeah.
Hi, Scott.
Jeremy Nixon, founder and CEO of Omniscience. And yeah, first I wanted to thank you for the $100 million ceiling. That was a big improvement to
floor.
A second, a floor.
Floor,
Yeah, floor. And I think assuaged a lot of people's very deep worry that open source AI would not be releasable, or that it would be hard to, work through government regulation en masse. My question is about Meta's decision not to release their multimodal models in the European Union. I have a sense that there's a potential world where, models like Llama 405B are launched in the United States, perhaps parts of Europe that are not, in onerous regulation, but not in California. And I guess one of the reasons for that, is related to privacy, but I guess, would you be working with, Jan LeCun and folk at Meta to ensure that—
With who?
Jan LeCun, for example, the head of Facebook's AI research org, and folk at Meta, to ensure that SB 1047 isn't onerous to a point where they would not release their models in California to begin with.
Yeah.
Because all of us are fine-tuning these models, and it's essential to our businesses.
And I'm sensitive to that, and I know, a lot of people are relying on Meta and making sure that they have access. This bill is so much more narrow than the European Union AI law. And as you noted, there are other issues there as well. It's not just the AI law. Their data privacy law is a lot way beyond what California requires. So I don't put them in the same category. And I think our bill has always been fairly focused and narrow, and I think we made it more so over time. I also, California is, so one of the things we've heard is companies are going to leave California, startups are going to leave California, they're going to train their models, release their models in, in Texas or Florida or some other state that doesn't let women control their bodies, and that outlaws trans people. So everyone's going to go to those states. That's what we hear. I don't know that I agree with that. But in addition, the bill does not. What triggers the bill's applicability is not where you train your model or where you release it. It's, are you doing business in California? And so you can go to Austin or Miami or Omaha and train the model there and do everything there. Unless you're going to have no connection to California, then you're covered. I'm skeptical that would happen, but fundamentally this bill, I don't think you can compare this bill to the AI Act or whatever its official name is in the EU. This is much, much narrower than that.
Let's try to do two quick ones. You got the mic.
Hey, Senator. As you know, I'm a huge fan. Thank you again. Thank you. Your work in affordable housing has helped more working class Californians than pretty much anybody else I'm aware of. Thank you for engaging so much with 1047. As you know, a concern I have is that so many crucial tools are capable of both utility and harm. As an example, I was talking to the head of DARPA Bio yesterday, and he said, wow, climate change is coming. We need to be able to re-engineer crops for better drought resistance, pest resistance. All of the AI tools that would really unlock this probably could be used for critical harm. And he said, I would be dismayed if researchers large and small across the nation did not have access to these tools, which inherently could do harm. So I love so many of the controls you've put in, but I am curious if fundamentally if there is a duty of reasonable care, which is tied to the quality of the safety and security protocol, or the responsibility to do no critical harm, how do we navigate that with tools that should be available to the general public, but which could fundamentally do harm?
Yeah, and I thank you for your very detailed engagement. I appreciate it. So there's been some people have, and I understand we all use sort of jargon and shortcut language, and we've seen this in some of the letters from some of the big tech companies about how the bill requires that you certify that it can't do anything harmful or whatever, similar language to that, which is not what the bill requires. Right now we have the reasonable assurance. We're looking at that language, and I think, and I would not be shocked if that got massaged. Again, we're not looking to, the goal here is not to eliminate risk. If you eliminate risk by living in your basement and never go, and even then there's risk because the ceiling could still collapse on you or the building could catch on fire. So literally there's no human way to eliminate risk. Life is about risk. But we also, as human beings, like to try to do things if it's reasonable, if we can find a reasonable way to make the risk less, right? Like lower the risk of the building burning down or the roof collapsing on your head by having building codes. We don't put building codes in place that are like over the top to make it because that might make it impossible to build the building. And that's our approach to 1047. We want to just create incentives to take reasonable steps to reduce risk, not to you have to sign an oath that nothing harmful can ever happen from your model. That's not what we're asking for. And again, if there is specific language that, just like with the idea that if you release the model and you no longer have possession of it, whether you should be responsible for being able to shut it down. Our intent from the beginning of the bill was that you shouldn't be responsible if you no longer have possession. But there were people who said the language isn't so clear. And so we went and we made it clear. And that applies to other areas as well. Because there are times when we think it's clear, but someone else says, you know what, this is a little vague. And we want to know that. And so, Dwight, I appreciate that you've been trying to help us with that.
I think we're going to do one final question. We're going to have to be really quick because we're about 10 minutes over, and I want everybody to stay in their seats for the surprise speaker at the end.
I want to know who the surprise speaker is.
Hi, Senator. Angela Hoover from Andy Search. I really appreciate you being here and being open to having the conversation. I think my biggest concern with SB 1047 is to do with competition. And I think compliance got brought up before. It's a huge concern for me. I mean, monopolies, if you take search, for example, already have so much going for them. And when it comes to small startups, the cost of, $500,000 a year is just not feasible for little tech. And so I'm kind of curious to get your opinion on if you think that this is going to stifle competition and actually lock little tech out of being able to compete in the AI space.
That is certainly not my goal, and I don't think that it will. And that's, again, why we put the $100 million training threshold. If you are spending less than $100 million, and it's tied to inflation, if you are spending less than $100 million to train your model, then you're simply not covered by the bill at all. There are threats to competition, and we know that there's a history in tech of big tech companies trying to squash the little tech companies, and those threats are right now with vertical integration and around chips and compute and staffing and data and the big labs and the big companies gobbling up a lot of those resources. That to me is the threat, not this bill. And I will also stress that Google and Meta, so not just Meta, but Google as well, are opposing the bill. So the companies that have a history, no offense, it's just like large companies, what they do, and that's why we like to have pro-competition laws, which I appreciate that YC has been a strong supporter of pro-competition laws. We have to try to, and antitrust and amazing people like Lina to try to stop the big companies from engaging in that predatory behavior. This bill is not going to empower that behavior, and that's why we limited it to these really huge models. We think that startups are overwhelmingly not even going to be covered by the law at all.
All right. Everybody, please give a great thank you to Senator Wiener. Thank you so much for coming, Senator. Appreciate it. And Shireen Gabari from Bloomberg. Okay, so we were, in the chaos of lunch, I was sort of looking at the crowd, and I hope you're able to stick around, Senator, and field some of these questions. I was looking around the crowd and recognized an AI celebrity, and I asked if he wouldn't mind, instead of me doing the closing remarks, you guys have heard from me enough today, would just give us some closing thoughts. Andrew Ng is a globally recognized leader in artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's the founder of Deep Learning AI, Landing AI, AI Fund, as well as co-founder and chairman of Coursera. Dr. Ng previously led AI teams at Google and Baidu, where he was instrumental in developing transformative technologies like Google Brain. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford. He's educated millions through his online courses, democratizing access to AI knowledge. His pioneering work spans deep learning, computer vision, robotics, AI applications across various industries. With 200 published research papers, numerous accolades, including being named Time's 100 most influential people. Dr. Ng continues to shape the future of artificial intelligence as both an innovator and investor. His mission is to build AI systems that enhance human capabilities and improve lives on a global scale. We're so honored to have you make an impromptu closing out of our amazing day today. Andrew, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Luther, for inviting me up, and Gary Luther for having me here. So I was actually taking some notes as the senator was speaking, and I want to share some thoughts on AI regulation and also address some specific points that Senator Wiener had mentioned. So as some of you know, I've been dismayed at the assault on open source software that we've been seeing around the world. So over the last year, I've traveled to many nations' capitals, including Washington, D.C., to speak with regulators about AI and AI safety. To be clear, I'm actually pro-AI regulation and pro-AI safety. For example, the Senator bashed Washington, D.C., but I think that the Senate just passed the Defiance Act, which I think is a very positive step to enhance AI safety by making it more difficult, to try to squash out non-consensual deepfake porn. So I think that's a great move by our nation's capital. Just passed the Senate. And when I look at different nations, I think the biggest mistake that many legislators are making is to regulate technology and applications in the same way. And it's important to distinguish between technology and applications. So one of the tricky things about AI is a general purpose technology. I think there was a question on this just now as well, meaning that AI is useful for a lot of different applications. And so the way we regulate for AI safety must be different than the way we regulate for narrow use technologies. To make an analogy, an electric motor is a technology with tons of applications. When you take the electric motor and you put it in an electrical vehicle or a blender or a dialysis machine, or to steer a smart bomb, those are the applications. And I think we can look at applications like blenders or electrical vehicles and say, how do we want to make sure that your blender is safe or your EV is safe? And what outcomes do you want, or often not want, if for people trying to build smart bombs? I think those would be good regulations. But if we're to go to an electric motor maker and say, I need you to make sure your electric motor is safe. Electric motors have no way to do that. And the only response would be to say, well, I don't want to make electric motors anymore if I can't stop someone from taking my electric motor and adapting it to harmful application. AI is like that too. When someone trains a large language model or a large multimodal model or other generative AI model, that's a technology. When someone puts that into a medical device or into a social media feed or into a chatbot or uses that to generate political deepfakes or non-consensual deepfake porn, those are applications. And the risk of AI is not a function. It doesn't depend on the technology. It depends on the application. This is why I think Washington, D.C. did such a nice job thinking through the Defiance Act, because that's a, really problematic application of AI. So let's use regulations to squash that. And just as you can't ask the electric motor maker to guarantee that the AI will never, ever be used for a harmful purpose, I think we ask a large language model provider to make their model safe. From a scientific, technical point of view, I actually have no idea how to do that. And in fact, in the manner specifically of SB 1047, in the manner of SB 1047, in the manner of SB 1047, I've actually read the statute quite carefully myself, and there are clauses in it that, as an AI developer myself, I honestly have no idea. I honestly don't know what I'm supposed to do to comply with those. And again, just to be clear, there is a difference between general purpose technology and narrow use technologies. So for example, C4 explosives has a relatively narrow set of use cases. And so if you regulate the technology, it does slow down all of those use cases of C4, but that might be a good thing. Since we're in San Francisco, where unfortunately we really struggle with the fentanyl crisis, I want to say fentanyl chemical precursors have a relatively small number of use cases. You can't do much more than make fentanyl and a few other things with them. So if you crush innovation in the manufacture of fentanyl precursors, which I also support, you will slow down the rise of fentanyl. This seems like a good thing in many places. But if you crush AI innovation, you slow down tons of beneficial applications. And in fact, I think that the assault on open source represented by many regulations around the world will make AI less safe. Because I've been speaking frequently with academics from UC Berkeley, from Stanford, from many of the great universities in California and around the world. One of the key ways to keep AI safe is to keep it open, because academics need to study these models. In fact, Senator mentioned social media. A lot of problems with social media we collectively discovered only because a smart reporter or a smart academic really dug deep and found those problems. So one of the best ways to make AI less safe, if that's the goal, is to shut down open source and shut down open AI, which is why I'm very concerned that the assaults on open source in the false name of safety will actually make AI more dangerous. Now, to address a few of the senator's remarks, I appreciate your remarks and I appreciate you coming here to speak. I respectfully submit that your mentioning the $100 million threshold is not the full story. It is true that I'm not a lawyer, not given legal advice. There is $100 million thresholds, and I am concerned, like many in the entrepreneur community are, that if the unelected FMD changes that threshold, that then people without spending $100 million will become subject to liability. Is Chris Langerek here? Oh, stand up. So Chris actually has one of the best analyses of SB 1047 that I encourage you to find online and read. What's the name of, what should they Google to find it? Context Fund. Right, Context.fund. There's really excellent analysis of SB 1047. And then I think in the manner of whether or not this is just a matter of doing what companies have committed to do, I would have a different characterization as well. I'm not yet finished. I'm reading the Llama 3.1 paper, and candidly, I think Meta gave a wonderful gift to the world with their release of the latest Llama 3.1. And I think Meta actually went through extensive safety testing, really, and I feel like, but I think Meta feels to me like they're certainly delivering the spirit of what they're committed to, but the details of that safety testing, I would argue, I believe, are quite different than what some of the proposed statute requires. And so, I agree that tort law already allows, people to sue model builders, hypothetically. This is America, right? People can sue anyone for anything. I feel like I'm concerned about different regulators creating new paths to liability. Just because there's one way for someone to sue someone for something does not mean we need new ways for people, maybe Attorney General, maybe others, to sue people for other things, especially if it doesn't actually make AI safer. When I look at some of the requirements, I would have a hard time knowing what exactly I would need to do to comply with them. And then I think in the manner of civil penalties versus criminal penalties, I think no one wants to commit perjury, at least I hope not. But the act of asking a developer to sign under penalty of perjury a guarantee of statements that seem to me as a non-lawyer really vague, before I sign such a statement, I would definitely, want to hire lawyers, hire consultants. The law refers to auditing, maybe hire auditors. And I think all this compliance mechanism, however much it costs, I don't see how that actually makes AI safer. So I think, unfortunately, we are at a turning point where laws that California or other places can choose to pass or not pass will have a huge impact on the future of open source. I was grateful to Chairman Khan's remarks but before the senator showed up, on the importance of open source and open weight models and protecting that. And I feel like this is one of those moments where such laws, not just in California but around the world, could have a huge impact on whether entrepreneurs, startups are allowed to keep on innovating, or if we should be spending our money not on building software, but on hiring lawyers and hiring auditors. So And I want to mention just one last thing. I was taking notes as Senator was speaking. I'm grateful that you welcome feedback and remarks. In fact, the Senator and I had a good conversation, had a conversation a few months ago where I shared some of my concerns about regulating technology versus applications. And as you're speaking just now, I had an interesting thought, which is I'm glad you welcome suggestions to the statute. I'm happy to try to do my best to make suggestions, and have to admit, with all due respect, that's your job, not mine. And I say that with affection and respect for the democratic system. I'm just as we spoke a few months ago, I'm happy to continue offering constructive suggestions. I really am. So for example, I think Anthropic's suggestion to get rid of the frontier model division, that's great. I think it will make the law less bad. I don't think it will still make it good, but it will definitely make it less bad. So I'm glad you're seriously considering that suggestion. And I candidly struggle to think how to modify a law that regulates the technology as opposed to the applications to make it sufficiently less bad to support it. But hopefully we can keep on working on it, on making it less bad. Thank you.
And that concludes AI Startups and Competition. Thanks for closing us out, Andrew Ng. Thank you, Senator Wiener. Thank you, Lina Khan. Thank you, Jonathan Kanter. Thank you, all the founders who did demos. For everybody, I'm going to hand it over to Gary.
I just really, one of the things that's pretty clear to me is, we need to do more of these things in person. We need to do these things respectfully in front of each other and to treat each other with a true community. And so that's what YC is. Thank you so much for coming out here. We're at an incredible moment in history and time. I'm very proud to see all of you. Thanks for coming out.